Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Was Forced into Arranged Dates? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Are you really sure about this? Jiraiya followed her to the bathroom and leaned with her arms crossed against the side of the door as she asked the question for the umpteenth time. Seriously, she had lost count of it. Yes, I'm sure. Now have you seen my comb? Jiraiya moved from her place to hand her the comb that was lying near the sink and handed it to the stressed-out girl, getting ready. Momo took it with a thanks and set herself in front of the mirror to straighten her hair. Your parents are designers. Yamamoto came into view of the mirror as she regarded her best friend in the reflection. You're a designer. You're a designer family. Momo sighed and looked at her friend. She was dressed a black tight leather dress that curved her silhouette nicely. She was wearing a leather choker and had some red/brownish long earrings and some other matching jewelry. Her sleek purple hair curved her face. Honestly, the look was a little extreme for Momo, but it suited the girl perfectly. She wore it like she owned it. Momo, on the other hand, was still in her underwear and had just finished putting her hair in a ponytail with a bright blue. The designer in her would have called the correct term aqua sparkle, but that would have been debatable ribbon. She moved from the mirror to her bedroom, closely followed by her friend. I am aware, which is exactly why I'm doing this. She finished. I know you are rebelling. Jiraiya picked up the black clothes bag that was lying ready on the bed. But wearing this to the party? That's a little extreme, even for you. The girl gestured the bag with one hand as she held it up with the other. It's a 2011 model. The black-haired shrugged. They must have liked it at one point. A small smile appeared on her lips as she took out the box that had her shoes in it. She opened it and regarded the dark red-heeled sandals inside. A groan escaped her friend as she noticed the shoes. I give up. The purple head let herself fall onto the bed defeated. She put her hands behind her head and stared at the ceiling. Momo picked up the bag from where Jiraiya had dropped it on the bed. Besides, I gave it a few tweaks to make it more fun. Jiraiya sat up straight and crossed her legs with a grin. You made it worse? Momo regarded the bag with a smile. I made it worse. And with a dramatic fake flick of her hair and a wink, she left for her dresser with the bag flipped behind her shoulder. Jiraiya chuckled and pulled out her phone to check the time. They still had a few hours before the actual party. She sighed once and looked around the large room. You could tell Yamamoto was a successful designer at first glance. If her huge apartment, or her walk-in dresser with at least 100 Yaoyorozu originals in it, wasn't a dead giveaway, then it would have been the 3 fitting dolls, male, female, child, the knitting machine, or the big butt drawing board in the middle of her living room. The dresser was not as much a gift as an obligation from her parents when she moved out of her parents' house to try and live on her own. And she was doing great. She was happy. She had a few clothing lines on her name already and could manage on her own. She swore the woman made things that she would never even think of out of thin air. Her creations, she called it. She was proud of her friend to take the step to move out. It made her less bound to her family name and success, and more her own person. Even though she grew up with butlers and maids her whole life, Momo never shied away from cleaning duties or cooking meals. She even enjoyed those too. Life was good. That is, without all of those bloody marriage proposals her parents kept forcing her to go to. She knew her friend would snap one of these days. She just never expected her to be so extreme about it and use her promise to wear a Yaoyorozu original to every party she went to. Her parents probably never expected her to edit one herself. The worst sold outfit ever. It amazed her that she even kept that hideous thing. Well, a soft voice cut Jiraiya out of her musings as she turned her head towards her friend. Her eyes went wide as she took in the sight in front of her. Momo was wearing a white toga kind of dress. It had a silk dark red cloth draped over one of her shoulders and the other was bare. The red stopped knee-high whereas the white continued until her feet. On her left leg there was a cut that showed her knee about thigh-high. The sleeve was not as much a sleeve as much as a cloak that draped on her shoulder and ended on her bracelet. Her arm was bare as the sleeve was an open one. The red was crossed over her chest, giving her a half-white, half-red look. Everything was held together with a gray/brownish belt and a big round same-colored pin on her shoulder that kept the sleeve in place. She was wearing bright blue earrings, bracelet and hair tied to boot. The look finished with the same red-colored sandals. Jairu snorted as Momo gave a satisfactional twist to show the outfit off. Putting a hand in front of her mouth to keep herself from laughing, Jairu tried to comment on it. Momo, it can't. Momo put her hands in her side patiently with a satisfied grin. This was the reaction she wanted. As soon as Jairu got a hold of herself, she pet her head questioningly. Jairu cleared her throat. I'm sorry, Yamamo, I'm not laughing for the way you want me to. Momo felt her mood drop. Then why were you laughing? Jairu looked at her apologetically. You look like a Greek goddess. I was laughing because your tweaks made the dress better. You look appealing. Momo deadpanned. No way. She ran toward the mirror and regarded herself. Gee, I look like a freaking coloring book? This is horrible. Jairu shook her head. You never liked your own designs, Yamamo, but you outdid yourself on this one. I think you'll actually start a new trend with this. Jairu got off the bed and put a hand on her friend's shoulder. I'm sorry. Momo groaned, silently wondering who would willingly wear this weird color combination. Shudo sighed as he looked in the mirror. He ran a hand through his two colored bangs only to watch them fall neatly back in place in the middle of his head. He hated his hair. He would have given anything to dye it completely white. But he knew his father would never allow it as long as he lived under his roof. It was proof of his proud Todoroki heritage after all. He let his hand slide down his face across his scar on his left side. It didn't hurt. Not physically anyway. You could say it was also because of his inheritance that he got it. He looked through his fingers at his heterochromatic eyes. One bright blue and the other gray/brown. A coloring book, he said to himself. Another sigh escaped him as he took a step backwards to look at his outfit. He was wearing an onyx gray suit, a black simple shirt and a fitting gray tie. It was obviously way too expensive as the suit was fitted to him perfectly. Another thing to show off his heritage. Stop sighing, Todoroki-kun. You look great. A voice interrupted his train of thoughts. He turned around and looked at his computer screen. On it were two people. On one side was a green-haired boy with freckles on his face and on the other a blue-haired man with squared glasses. I'm sorry, Ida-kun, but I'm just not cut out for this thing. He walked towards the screen to his friend's Skype conversation and sat down in front of it. Are you sure you guys can't make it? We apologize, Shudo, the green-haired boy answered. But my mom says I'm not allowed to leave the house until I'm fully healed. He showed his casted arm on the screen. The young boy had been overdoing it again. Midoriya was training to become a fireman. A noble profession, if he did not have the tendency to go overboard now and then and almost literally tried to lift burning cars on his own. It didn't help that Midoriya's pyromanian friend kept daring him into contests to see who saves more people every time. Shudo turned the other side of the screen. I have to stay here. The man sighed. My fiancé's concocting a new weapon for me to use on the field again, but I don't want the house to explode, so I need to keep an eye on her. Ida was a freshly out-of-school police officer. Also a dangerous profession. But his house was actually a more dangerous at the moment, because he was living together and now engaged to a clever scientist who had a tendency to make her inventions explode before they worked. Shudo never understood how those two happened. Being so different, but then again, love works in mysterious ways. I understand, it's just that I've never been to these things before, so much could go wrong. Shudo was actually more afraid of the whole thing than he let on. Or could go right. You could actually find someone that actually fits you perfectly. The green-haired boy hinted with a smile. Shudo pulled a face. Like that would ever happen. He was actually betting on that to never happen. Because he had made a bet with his father. The only reason he actually went through with this whole thing. The bet was that he had until 25 to find himself a suitable wife, by himself. Shudo never had any actual interest in love, He was way more focused on studying what he loved most. Chemicals. Especially fire and ice-related things. How atoms so similar yet so different could make such appealing things and yet be so destructive, fascinated him beyond belief. Of course his father expected him to help him run the family business, so he had to take economics, bookkeeping and a lot of other boring business subjects. All on which he excelled because as long as he did those well, he could choose his other subjects. Happy that he did, because he met his friends in those classes. As soon as he had graduated, however, he realized he had forgotten this little side bet. And as he had turned 25 last month, he had no choice to go to this ball his father had not so subtly organized in his name. The unobvious fact that only rich bachelorette women and men of his age were attending that would make potential suitors for him did not go unnoticed by a lot of people, the men being invited as a cover-up. He knew most of the women were going there because he was just some rich kid searching for a wife. Marring into easy money. His father didn't care about that. As long as they had a good background, any girl would do. No, he would not let that happen. He regarded his friends. I doubt it. Rich women are horrible. His friends nodded silently. Just show your face and then be off. You're not actually that famous, you know, no one will know who you are. This was true. Although everyone knew the famous Todoroki name, and his brothers and sister had already very successful lives, he never shared their enthusiasm. He never went to fancy parties, photo shoots or live TV shows. Not a lot of people knew what he actually looked like. Only the people of their main branch knew from the few meetings he had been to. This gave him a little hope. Only his hair would give him away. Here's to hoping there were a lot of redheads today. Fat chance of that happening though. Another sigh escaped him as he straightened up. You're right, Ida-kun, let's just get this over with. Ida nodded enthusiastically with crossed arms and Midoriya gave him a thumbs up with his not casted arm. Go get him, Tiger, the boy said with a wink. Shudo rolled his eyes as he said his goodbyes and turned to computer off. He took his invitation in hand and checked his way to expensive watch to calculate how much time it would take to get there. The party was in one of the company halls, so he still had to drive a short bit to actually get there. He stared as himself one last time sideways in the mirror and then walked out of his room with a determined look. He could do this. Jair was right, people were weird. As soon as she had stepped out of the car, the cameras were right in her face. People loved her outfit. It didn't help that she had heard the fifth, "I told you so," whisper in her ear from her friend. She held away to expensive champagne glass in her hand, while she leaned against a wall in a corner. Hoping to escape all of the potential suitors she was sure of her mother had helped gather for this stupid party. She knew it was organized by one of the biggest, if not the biggest, and richest companies in the country. Todoroki Incorporated. They owned almost everything, from the smallest tech lab to the biggest mall in Japan. She knew her parents had a few shops in those malls and were desperate to keep them and even to expand. So she had to be sure not to insult anyone. There was but one problem. She also knew that the son was here, looking for a wife. But she had no clue what the man looked like, other than that he was about her age. Cursing to herself for rebelling and not looking up anything about this party, she tried to be as polite as possible to every man that tried to talk to her. So her parents could not use anything against her other than her dress code, which she also failed at. Today was a disaster. Momo had lost her friend a little while ago on the snacking table. She saw her from afar, talking to a young man with blonde hair. He had a strange black lightning bolt in his hair and they seemed to be talking intimately. She recognized him. His name was Denki Kaminari, and his parents owned an electric company somewhere abroad. They had a house here in Japan and visited often. She had been on an arranged marriage date with him before and he seemed like a decent guy, if you liked his silly jokes and aloof behavior, that is. She looked at her friend and saw she was smiling. This made her smile too. She was suddenly very happy she had convinced Jairu to come with her. Although she wasn't that rich, her father was a famous movie music composer and she knew the girl dreamed of doing the same thing. Her father's fame is what made her get the invite in the first place, but she didn't want to go, until Momo convinced her. It seemed at least something good came out of this day. Momo sighed as she moved from her spot near the wall. She put her glass down on a nearby table as she looked for the bathroom to try and get a break. She was stopped by something touching her bare leg. She looked down in horror to see the man she least wanted to see. A tiny purple-haired man with curls as big as tennis ball, and he barely reached her thigh. He was wearing his usual purple and yellow striped suit as he tried to catch her attention. She sighed openly as she regarded him. "Yes, Minoru-san?" She tried to politely say, but she knew she was failing in mustering up a smile. "May I just say you look dashing this evening, Miss Yayorozu?" He rose his glass to her as he wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. She groaned silently as she rolled her eyes. She was sure he had seen it but didn't care. "Not your usual style, I admit, but appealing nonetheless." She noticed his eyes roamed her body in a not very polite way. She shivered under his glare. She did all she could to muster up a smile. "Why, thank you, Minoru-san now. If you'll excuse me." She walked past him as quickly as she could. Every party it was the same thing. He would come up to her and ask her to dance. She would refuse politely at least 5 times until he found another victim. But this time she would not let him get to her. She only knew his name, but it was enough. She knew he wasn't important, so she couldn't care less if she was a little rude. She didn't need to know anything about this creep other than that he was a pervert. She had seen him hit on and dance with women on every party. Every time he drank he got touchier and touchier. She hated him. And Momo didn't hate a lot of people. He was obviously drunk already, so she had to get out of here quickly, so that's what she did. Until she felt a tug on her wrist. "Come on, miss, don't be such a party pooper. I didn't even ask you yet." He had grabbed her arm and pulled her down to his height with a small eck. She knew she was currently giving him a full view of her cleavage, which he hungrily took in. She was disgusted. She tried to pull wrist back as she uttered a "no, thank you," between gritted teeth. He didn't let go as he stared at her chest, almost drooling. Momo had enough off it. Letting her self-defense classes kick in, she put a foot backwards, opened her palm to take his wrist, pushed it upwards and put her other hand on his chest. She then pushed him backwards with enough force that he had let go of her hand. Her now free arm got loose and the force made it go backwards. She had not heard the "Mr." The lady obviously doesn't dash in time until she felt her elbow impact into someone's stomach behind her. She looked around in horror just in time to see a man bend over with his hands on his stomach with an oof. Momo felt horrified. This party was turning out to be way worse than a disaster. Shudo had noticed her. Everyone had noticed her, he was sure. But he didn't believe it. She was leaning against a wall boredly, rolling around the champagne in her glass. She was wearing his colors. His colors. The color book colors. He realized he was openly staring, but he didn't care. He drank in the image. The dark red. The gray/brown, the white, and even his bright blue. And to top it all, she made it look good. She owned those colors. Whereas he hated them. Did she wear them on purpose? To catch his attention? Was she scheming something? That couldn't be. She hadn't even glanced his way. She didn't glance any way at all. She looked like he thought before. But his eyes fell on her face. He admitted silently she was pretty cute. He noticed the blue ribbon in her raven hair and smiled at the detail. No, she was appealing. Startled by his own thinking, he shook his head and tried to concentrate on the person in front of him. A pretty little girl with pink hair. He vaguely noticed her eyes were yellow and she was wearing a green/purple leopard print cocktail dress. She was talking about some acid-type thing her father invented that could easily go through solid cement. But he only heard parts of the conversation. She didn't seem to mind his vague and yes as she continued to babble happily. He let her. His eyes fell on the colored woman again. He had noticed she had short conversations with a few gentlemen, but he had also noticed something different. Her smile never reached her eyes. She was politely smiling, sure, but he knew that smile anywhere. For he had practiced it in front of the mirror enough to recognize it. This woman clearly didn't want to be here as much as he did. Feeling a little annoyed about that thought, he fought the sudden urge to change that. It was his father's fault this party happened, not his, so why did he feel guilty? He then noticed something else. A real smile. If he didn't think she looked appealing before, he definitely thought it now. She was looking at something from afar and turned his head towards the direction. He noticed a man and a woman talking animatedly. He recognized the woman as she was the one she entered with. She was clearly happy for her friend. Shudo turned back to where the colored woman was standing only to notice she was gone. A little panicked, he looked around. Wait, why was he panicked? It's not like he was ever going to approach her or anything. His eyes fell on her again a few seconds later as she was talking to a small purple-haired man. He knew this man. Not 10 minutes earlier he had been trying to grab another woman's behind before someone slapped his hand away just in time. Yes, he liked to overserve what was happening around him, so he saw that. And now he was obviously trying with this raven-haired beauty. For some reason this rubbed him the wrong way, but it was none of his business. Right when he tried to turn back to his conversation, he noticed the annoyance in her face. Getting annoyed in her stead, he decided she was probably too polite to turn him down, so he decided he would help. Not really thinking straight, he excused himself from his talking companion and walked straight towards the colored woman. She tried to walk away, but he saw the man took her wrist and pulled her down. With renewed energy, he was now sure he was doing the right thing, as she was obviously not interested in his advances. He noticed she was trying to take her arm back, but he wouldn't let go. Time for him to step in. Mister, the lady obviously doesn't dash, he tried to say, but he was graced with an elbow to his stomach from none other than the lady herself. He doubled over with an oof. As the impact was much stronger than he anticipated, he only thought one thing. This woman didn't need his help. But he was none the less impressed about her ability all the same. Oh my God. I'm so sorry, he heard her say. Not really daring to say much, in fear of his voice not being fully back, he coughed a little, waving his hand as in, just a minute. He felt a hand on his shoulder as she kneeled in front of him to be able to look into his face. Are you all right? I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. I tried to get. She was obviously flustered, but as soon as he looked up she fell silent. Their faces were but a few inches apart. In her eyes he saw surprise. Did she finally recognize him? Then it turned to concern. Realizing this would turn awkward fast, he cleared his throat and stood up straight. He held out his hand to her. I'm all right, I think. That's quite an arm you got there. Momo felt horrible. This wasn't supposed to happen. She only tried to get rid of the purple nuisance, not hurt anyone else. Especially when that person was obviously trying to help her. Oh my God. I'm so sorry, she whispered to him. She stepped closer to the man and extended her hand, not sure if she could touch him or not. She held her other to her mouth. She saw him raise his hand. Hoping this meant, it's okay, or, just a minute. She waited for a bit. Then deciding not to take any chances, she put her hand on his shoulder and crouched in front of him. Are you all right? I'm sorry. I didn't see you. I tried to get dash, she started, but she was startled by him looking up at her. He first thought was that she was an idiot. This man was gorgeous beyond belief. She took in his well-formed jaw and heterochromatic eyes. She noticed his scar on his left side of his face, but it charmed him somehow. She had just hit this man. This man that tried to help her and was totally her type. A real gentleman. Yes, she was stupid. And staring. A little startled when he cleared his throat and stood up, she stayed crouched to process what had just happened. Looked at his extended hand and then back to him. I'm all right, I think. That's quite an arm you got there. Was that a chuckle? She took his hand a little reluctantly, almost afraid to do something wrong again, and let herself be pulled up. As soon as she opened her mouth to explain herself, she was startled by another voice. Girl, you all right? What just happened? Jairu ran up to her and put her hand on her shoulder. Miss, that was quite a show you put on there. I'm sure he will feel that tomorrow. Denki chuckled as he pointed with his thumb behind him, walking towards them as it was the most casual thing ever. They all looked towards the purple-haired man. He lay in the middle of the room, staring openly to the sky. His drink spilled all over him and the glass chattered around him. They watched as two waiters ran up to him. One cleaned up the pieces swiftly and the other pulled the short man up and guided him to the door. Oh, I see. Jairu suddenly chuckled. The man and Momo both turned to Jairu, who had taken out her cell phone and turned it to them. Say cheese? She asked. Cheese? They both asked her, as Momo pet her head and the colored-haired man simply rose his eyebrow. A soft click startled them both, and before they could process what happened, Jairu pushed her phone towards them. "You guys are a match made in heaven," she chuckled happily. Momo looked at the photo. The first thing she noticed were the colors. There were a lot of them, but not as much as she thought there were. This was because both sides of the image had the exact same amount of them. His hair, her dress. His eyes, her accessories, his suit, her eyes and hair. They really did match. And her designing eye would have appreciated the unity of it a great deal. If not for a tiny detail that made her blush and turn to him with wide eyes. It seemed like he realized it at the same time and looked at her with that same surprised look on his face. They then looked down simultaneously. They were still holding hands. He was holding them up to their waist and hers was resting neatly in his. As if they touched fire, they quickly retreated their hands. He put his behind his back and she put her hand in the other in front of her. She knew she must be bright red at this point. But if she wasn't mistaken, she had also seen a blush on his face. But he was hiding it as he looked the other way. She must say he looked rather cute. "Ah, come on, that was adorable." Jairu chuckled. Now, Kyuka-san, you shouldn't tease them like that." The blonde boy patted the other man's shoulder. The man looked at him surprised by the touch. "But I must admit, was this planned?" Momo shook her head wildly. "No. I mean," she sighed once to calm herself a little. "No, we've never met before, have we?" She turned to the two-toned-haired man questioningly and he quietly shook his head. "I don't think we have." "Well, any a time to meet someone new, I guess." Denki chuckled as he pushed Jairu away from them. "Let's leave them to it, shall we?" He addressed Jairu as he gently urged her to the snacking table again. Jairu nodded once but turned her head towards the man with squinted eyes. She then moved up her hand and put up the pointy and pinky finger. She turned them towards her eyes and then to him. She did this movement twice. Momo knew what it meant. "I'm watching you." Seriously, this girl was too protective sometimes. But it warmed her heart to know she was looking out for her. "That's quite a friend you have there," she heard the man say. Momo was still looking at Jairu, now arguing with Denki about something as they had reached the table again. She nodded silently with a smile. "Yeah, she's a gem. You've got a nice smile." His low voice melted her like chocolate on a fire. She felt her eyes widen and turned to him surprised. "I'm sorry?" she asked him, not sure if she had dreamed that last part. "Your smile." He repeated. "Your real smile, it's quite nice." He had said it in a soft voice, but with a straight, genuine face. She felt herself blush. How can he say something so corny with a straight face? Not really sure how to answer to that, she put one of her loose hairs behind her ear. "Thank you," she tried, seemingly realizing what he had said. He put his hand behind his head with an awkward blush. She then remembered something and turned back to the man and took a step closer. "That reminds me. Are you all right? Does it still hurt?" The man got startled again with the sudden movement and took a step backwards. He cleared his throat again with a cough to calm himself. Yes, I'm fine." He held up his hands to keep some distance. Suddenly feeling awkward by the sudden closure in space, she herself took a step back. "I'm sorry again. I didn't see you were behind me. Had I known?" She looked sideways with shame. "No need to apologize, he was clearly out of bounds, and to be frank, I'm happy to know you can defend yourself. More women should take those classes." He smiled at her. She felt a blush come up again. She wasn't sure she was seeing what she was seeing. He was smiling. Feeling like this was a rare treat, she blurted, "You should smile more often too." Had she seriously just said that? She put her hand on her mouth in shock and saw his eyes widen. "I'm sorry?" he asked her. Having a feeling of déjà vu, she shook her head. "No, nothing," she stammered. I need to go now." She blurted and turned around, ready to leave. "Please wait." He reached for her hand again to stop her. "Can I at least know your name?" She stopped as soon as she felt his hand again, letting the question sink in. Thinking quickly, she went over the things that had just conspired. The dress, the punch, the picture, the awkward compliments, the blushing. She had made a horrible impression. Saying her name now would only make things worse and probably shame her family. It was also best that she didn't knew his either. That way she didn't have to tell her mother to whom exactly she had made such a blunder to. Jolting out of her musings, she realized that probably quite some time had passed. She turned around towards him and put a finger to her lips. "Let's keep a secret." She winked, trying to keep it playful. "I won't tell you my name as I don't need to know yours, all right?" He looked at her a little startled, but then smiled a little mischievous and bended over a little in a bow. She realized he was still holding her hand and felt her eyes widen as he pulled her hand towards his lips. He gently kissed the top of her knuckles and smiled to her. "All right, Miss Mysterious. A gentleman never kisses and tells." "'Kay, time to go, Momo," she told herself. As she quickly took back her hand, he subtly let go off and practically ran out of the room to hide her unmistakable blush. Today was a day to remember. And remember it she would. Not only because her mother found out about the dress fiasco, but also because she had begged Jiru to send her a copy of the picture and she now saved it as a screensaver. Shudo watched her leave with a chuckle. He had seen her blush as soon as the words had left his mouth. Not knowing what came over him, and put his hand through his hair with a sigh. He then put it against his face, knowing he was also hiding a blush of his own. He knew why she didn't want to say her name. He actually figured it would have been better not to know, as his father would also want to know what had conspired here. But he still couldn't help wanting to know it himself. She had made quite an impression on him, and not only because of the dress or the elbow. Good thing he had quite a few lessons in kickboxing himself, or that punch would have done a lot more damage. He figured it was time to leave the party as well. It was getting quite late, and frankly, he figured the most interesting person had already left. As he sat in a car that brought him home, as he went over the things that happened, he looked at his hand that had touched hers twice now. He then brought it to his mouth and leaned on it with his chin while his elbow rested on the windowsill. He watched the wet drops fall down the window as he drank in the perfume of the mysterious girl that lingered on his hand. He wasn't a perfume guy, but this tropical mix of coconut and something else would go great with his aftershave. Thinking perhaps the next party he would take out the bottle and use it. For research purposes, of course. He chuckled as he remembered Midoriya's words. Yes, he did find someone that matched him perfectly, quite literally. Here he was, standing in front of the mirror. Again. Was he going to make a habit out of it? He looked at his right hand, in which he was holding his phone. It had a few messages from his friends. He should have never told them about the encounter 3 months ago he had at the party. He should have never told them about the raven-haired mysterious beauty he tried to help, let alone that she didn't even need his help any more than he would. He should definitely have never told them about the perfume she had, and that he was curious about how it would mix with the one he had. He tried to hide it, that as a chemist, it was only natural curiosity. But as much as he tried to hide it, his friends as much as himself knew it was a bad lie. And most of all, he shouldn't have ever told them he was anxious to meet her again and if she would even be there, let alone look for him as much as he would look for her. Yet he did. He scrolled through the chat he had with his 2 best friends and stopped near the ending to read the last messages. That, "Just put it on Shudo, even if she isn't wearing the same perfume as before. Women love that stuff. Ingenium. Midoriya-kun is right. Remember last time you used that bottle?" Shudo sighed and looked at his other hand in which he was holding that said bottle. He got the bottle from his sister as a present. She said he needed to man up and get himself a girl already, so she got him the most expensive bottle she could find. He had heard of the label and he couldn't say he didn't like the way it smelled. But so far he had only worn it twice. And both times were a disaster. Once was on the day itself, because his sister insisted on putting it on as soon as he unwrapped the Christmas present. He had stared at the bottle of Armani uninterested and with an eyebrow raised, before she took it out of his hand and sprayed a generous amount around his neck before he could even realize what had happened. As it was a company party, he swore women had actually shown interest in him way more than usual. He tried to wash of the smell, but it lingered for 3 days after that. Each day his fellow female employees asked him what he was wearing, that she should wear it more often, and how come he changed his hair which he didn't, or how nice his tie looked which was a regular gray color. It made him feel uncomfortable and was happy when everything turned to normal and people ignored him again. The second time he wore it was when it was his mother's birthday. This time he only sprayed on a small amount of it on, so he wouldn't have the trouble afterwards at work. But as soon as he entered the hospital and walked to the reception, he tried to ignore the people staring after him. He convinced himself it was the usual scar staring, or the huge pack of flowers he was carrying as a gift. Even his mom chuckled when he entered and asked if he had a date afterwards. She said he looked more and more like a man and wondered when he would bring in the girl with him. This embarrassed him greatly and he swore to never open that bottle again. Until now. Shudo. Yes, I know. But what if she isn't there? Things could get weird. He knew his friends and that they would understand what they meant. As soon as he had typed his message, he saw the usual 3 dots appearing, that were indicating someone was typing. Both messages appeared almost instantly. Don't sweat it. From what I heard, she will definitely be here. Ingenium. You worry as much as I do. The only thing to do is try and find out. What Ida-san said. Knowing you'll regret it afterwards. Shudo bit his lip and stared at himself again in his reflection. He had taken out the best suit he had, which was dark blue. He had a dark red shirt on with thin stripes on it, with a gray/silver tie and matching shoes. He pet his head sideways once and concluded this was the best he was going to get. He put down the bottle and typed a single message into his cell phone. Shudo. It's not worth the trouble. But thanks you guys. He then slid his phone in his back pocket and straightened up. He took his collar of his vest and pulled it once. He breathed in once and then breathed out slowly. He could do this. What could go wrong? He smiled at himself to practice his usual polite smile and walked self-confidently towards the door. It closed with a soft thud behind him. You could hear his phone ping behind the closed door, a bit of a muffled sound and a curse. Suddenly the door opened. He sped inside, took the bottle from the shelf once more and left the room with the bottle in hand. He was still holding his phone in the other. Kaken says you're a wuss. You're going to kill the guy. You're overreacting. I am not. You're not going like that and that's final. Momo sighed onto her laptop. She was currently Skyping with her best friend who was abroad. She wanted to show her the outfit her mom made her wear for the party this evening. I don't have a choice, G-. My mom said I had to wear this one, because I rebelled at my last dress. I don't care, Yamamoto. I can't let you go like that in good conscience. Jiro had crossed her arms and looked at her friend with a stern face. What's with all that yelling? You all right, Jiro? A voice on the other side of the screen sounded concerned. No. Don't enter. This scene is off limits to innocent eyes. Jiro had turned sideways and rose her arm in a protective way. Her other was obviously turned towards the screen in hopes of constructing the view from her concerned boyfriend. After last night, you can hardly call us innocent, can you? The boy grinned as he came into view of the camera. Hello, Denki, Momo chuckled. Kaminari's head whipped sideways with a startled look. Yamamoto. Sorry. I didn't know you were Issei. The man fell silent and stared at the screen with wide eyes. Jiro face-palmed. Momo bit her lip. It's a little overkill, don't you think? He suddenly crossed his arms pensively and rose an eyebrow. That's what I keep telling her. Jiro suddenly stood up and turned Denki around. Now please leave us to it so I can sort this mess out. She not so generously pushed him out of the door. Denki quickly got in a later Yamamoto before the door smashed in his face. Momo chuckled again but got serious once Jiro sat behind the screen. Talk was the only thing she said as she crossed her arms. Again. Momo sighed and explained how her mother found out about the dress and that even though it was an unintentional success, was still angry about how she tried to rebel out of the promise she made. So she had to make a new promise. She could only wear a Yayazuru original that was the most recent one. Little did she know it would take 3 months before the next party, and the only outfits that were made in that time were a lingerie line. So now she was stuck with a dress that looked more like it belonged in the bedroom than in a ballroom. When she tried to explain that to her mom, however, she only said, "At least this time you'll actually come home with someone." And no more comment added to that. Momo started to pace around the room as she talked. She stopped in front of the ceiling-high mirror in her living room and took in the view. She was wearing a dark red leather dress that went all the way down to her heels. It had a beige striped belt in the middle that was a bit tilted. The split on her side reached until her thigh, and the split in the front. Well, that one reached her navel. Her shoes were the same red color and were ankle boots. She felt really uncomfortable in the whole outfit, but it was the best one she had from the whole pile. Or at least the only one decent enough. Jiro stared at her lost in thought. She had her hand on her chin the whole story and sighed once she was done. She then moved her hand to her temple and pressed it. Momo sat back behind the laptop and bit her lip again. At least it looks good on you, but it's seriously way to open. Did she say something about editing it? Momo shook her head. No, but if I change it too much she's going to notice, and I don't know what she will do if I screw it up again. So we need to change it enough that it's still a yaoyorozu, but we need to make it more tasteful. Momo, though, about that, I could make it look like a corset, but lace it in front. It will still be open, but at least everything will be stuck. Jiro nodded. You think you can manage that? Mono nodded as well. If it's a light color, like the beige, it will still look natural. But even if I start now, I'll be late to the party. Better late than naked. Jiro simply shrugged. Either way, he'll definitely notice you. I don't know who you're talking about. Momo blushed a little as she disappeared from the screen to change into something more comfortable. Like you don't. Jiro chuckled. You think he'll be there? Momo appeared again on the desk, paired with her sewing box and the leather outfit. She got to work immediately. I'm sure he will be. His eyes were glued to you almost the whole evening. I saw him look at you even before he turned all heroic. That was because of the colors. Momo blushed a little. Perhaps. Jiro nodded. But you have to say, you guys looked amazing together. Make sure you get his name this time. Yamamo sighed. I'm not sure I want to give it to him in this outfit. She held up the fabric and got to work again. Jiro chuckled. I'm sure he won't mind as much as you do. Momo let her head fall onto the desk with an ugh. This made Jiro laugh a little. You will message me as soon as you see him, all right? Jiro turned serious again. Sure. As soon as I can. Yamamo turned towards the screen with a smile. But it'll make me feel better about the outfit if I know Mr. Heroic is there. You really trust him, don't you? Momo felt herself relax. Any man that helps against grape juice is a good man in my book. Jiro made a fist in the air. Speaking of great men. It was Momo's turn to grin. How about you tell me about last night? Jiro turned bright red first, but then grinned and turned to an excited whisper as she told her tale to her stressed-out friend. Shudo looked around the room for the 5th time. He wasn't really talking to anyone, he was only lingering around a stand-up table and fingered his champagne glass. The party was in full swing, and even if the guests were still coming in, he didn't peg her for the being late kind of girl. He felt himself get a little disappointed when he lowered his eyes towards his glass again and let out a silent sigh. Why did he even think she would show up? Why did he even go through the trouble of putting on the perfume in the first place? A ping made him reach towards his pocket and he slowly took out his phone to scroll through the messages again. Did she arrive yet? Ingenium. Did you really think he would be on his phone if she did? Look, he saw this message. Do you think she'll be coming? Isn't it late yet? Man, I wish I could be there. Ingenium. It's a closed-off party, Midoriya-kun. Only the highest of ranks were invited. The conversation made him smile a little. At least he had his friends to talk to this time. Long live social media. Shudo. No, not yet. I don't think she'll come. Sorry, man. Maybe she wasn't invited? Ingenium. Or a previous engagement. She could just be late? Are you going to wait? Shudo. It would be rude to leave now. It's only been an hour and a half. Ingenium. He would insult the host. Shudo. I'll keep you guys posted. Shudo put away the phone again and decided to look around once last time before deciding to go socialize. After all, this was what his father expected of him. But he barely had time to put away his phone because a rather loud voice made him freeze on everything he was doing. Todoroki-gun. A shiver went through his whole body and he swore the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He turned around just in time to catch the woman who quite literally threw herself into his arms. Toga-san. He pried her arms from around his waist to try and get her off him. Always a pleasure. He tried to smile politely as he took in the girl in front of him. She was wearing her blonde hair in 2 side buns on either side of her head. She was wearing a short beige dress that let out her legs in the hope of making her seem a little taller, for she was quite petite for her age. The dress was adorned with quite a lot of jewels of which he was sure were probably very expensive. You never called. She huffed as she finally stood up straight and put her hands in her sides. Shudo didn't know what to say. He'd never been good with social contact, let alone women. The only reason he knew this girl because his father made him go on arranged marriage dates. 2 to be exact. One with a small green-haired girl. She was kind and it was a pleasant conversation. But she was honest and told him she had actually only agreed to this to ease her mother's worries and nagging. She actually already had a boyfriend but she was too shy to tell her family yet. Shudo completely understood and they had a politely fun time chatting about the rich families they knew and their gossips. The second one was none other than the lady in front of him. Himiko Toga. Daughter of a rich hospital chain director, not the one his mother went to, luckily, but he had a vague suspicion she also had ties to the mafia. Not something you spoke of in the open, but still it was pretty obvious for anyone who dared to look closer. This, however, was not the reason he dreaded meeting her again, or in his defense, never called. The first reason was she was very clingy. He noticed this when she constantly tried to touch him in any way she could during the date. The second reason was that she was very loud and demanding. Everyone had to hear and agree to what she was saying at all times. This annoyed him greatly because he on the other hand liked the quietness and the anonymity. Something she was very good at. Ruining apparently, if you could tell by the whispers now going around at the party. The third reason is because he quite plainly told his father that he was not in the least interested in this girl. And even his father sighed openly at this. His father rarely showed any type of interest in his relationships or tastes. But he clearly expressed that it was a shame. For he didn't like to anger her father. This concluded in the last reason he didn't like this woman. She was obviously a daddy's girl who hated to be wronged. He breathed in and out once to brace himself for interaction with this lady. I do apologize, but I've been quite busy lately. He tried to smile, hoping she fell for it. Oh, lighten up. She took his arm in hers and leaned against him. I was only teasing. I know you would have a perfectly good reason to. She stopped herself and looked at him from top to bottom. He swallowed openly and cursed himself for the one thing he had actually looking forward to today. He should never listen to his friends. You smell good. Is that a new perfume? Before he got to answer her question, she continued to babble happily. You probably knew I was coming and did something like this to impress me. She winked at him. Silly Shudo, can I call you Shudo? Shudo, you know you don't need to try so hard for me. I was charmed from the moment we first met, you know this, dash. Shudo stared at her with open surprise. He knew women seemed to like this smell, but now he was sure of it. He would toss the bottle out of the window as soon as he could. This was turning out to be the worst night of his life. He sighed openly as he let the girl ramble, too tired to even shake her off his arm. He looked around in hopes of seeing the raven-haired girl again, but noticed a crowd had formed around him and Toga. He looked around the crowd and felt all hope of ever finding her again fade into the distance. They were all openly staring at them and whispering his name. There was no way he could ever look past these people whom now seemed interested in everything he did now that it was finally out whom he was. Momo breathed in and out once before she stepped out of the car that drove her to the entrance. She had never raced so hard to finish an outfit before, but she was proud of what she had done. It was still pretty CC compared to what she usually wore. But she was confident it was at least more tasteful than before and actually quite suiting for a party. She wasn't sure if she did or didn't want to run into the mystery man in this outfit yet. But at least she made it before it got too late to enter with style. Taking a beige shawl with her to cover her shoulders and cleavage a little, she let it hang around her arms and entered the building. The first thing she noticed about the party is when she entered, all of the women were huddling on one side of the room. She rose an eyebrow but shrugged it off and waited near the entrance before a waiter offered her a glass of champagne. She took it with a polite thank you and made her way across the room towards an empty stand. She put down the glass after taking a sip and looked around. Feeling a little glad all of the women were gone, she took her time to take in her surroundings and search for a certain familiar face. Her smile faltered quickly, however, when she failed to notice the white and red streaks in any of the remaining male men. Her attention diverted towards the side of the room where everyone seemed to animatedly talk to each other about something that was happening over there. Feeling a little curious, she leaned in a little to hear the conversation next to her. A blonde man with obvious fake eyelashes was talking to a girl she almost didn't see at first. Boy, did she blend into the room. "Yeah, I heard Todoroki-san has finally graced himself with his presence," the man told the woman. He seemed rather proud of that fact. "Really? I wondered when he would show up. Did you know this is his second party?" Momo suddenly lost interest in the conversation and sighed openly. Of course, this was about the great Todoroki-san that everyone seemed to want to suddenly befriend. Feeling a little let down, she wondered if she should have just declined the invitation. Knowing her luck, a run-in with a person of this importance could only lead to disaster. Perhaps Mr. Mysterious wasn't even invited to the party. After all, she didn't know his status or anything else about the man. Lost in thought, she drained her glass absent-mindedly and at an alarming rate. She suddenly noticed when it was empty that being so rushed about the costume, she hadn't done to the bathroom for over 7 hours. And draining a glass this fast was obviously not doing her well. She left her stand rather abruptly to search for the bathroom, making a mental note to next time search for the bathroom sign before she drained glasses like a drunk. Finally finding the room, she quickly went inside. After washing her hands, she stared at herself in the mirror to see if everything was still in place. She sighed at her image. She didn't look forward to going inside again, for she dreaded a run-in with the most famous and dangerous man before she was decent, but she could hardly leave the party when she only entered. Not to mention she had no indication at all that the man she was looking for was even present at the party. Luckily, everyone seemed preoccupied about the Todoroki boy enough so her dress didn't stand out too much. Totally lost in thought, she left the bathroom. She opened the door to the inside and stepped out without actually paying attention to her surroundings. Had she, though, she would have noticed a man running straight at her as he had just turned his head to see if he was still being followed. The collision wasn't pretty. Luckily, both had great reflexes as he had grabbed her side to keep her from falling down right after she hit against his chest, and she had the time to grab onto his shirt with one hand to keep herself upright. He pulled her up a little harder than she expected as she fell against his chest with her eyes closed and her nails digging into his shirt. He closed his remaining hand around hers to keep her steady. She noticed two things. The first one was how broad and muscled this man was as she leaned against him. The second was how good he smelled. She recognized the smell as Armani, because she had one that fitted very well with this one. For some reason, she felt lucky that today she was wearing this. She slowly opened her eyes and looked up, bewildered as to whom was hugging her so tightly. She felt a blush come up and stifled a gasp as she stared into the heterochromatic eyes she had been looking for earlier this evening. He smiled down at her gently, seemingly relieved. "I feel you dash dot." She stammered. "Great Momo, way to express yourself. I'm so sorry, are you all right?" He suddenly asked her. But strangely enough, he didn't let go. Not that she wanted him to. "Yes, She started. She slowly let go of his vest and noticed he was holding her hand. She used her other hand to put it against his chest and gave him a polite push to make some room between them. He quickly let go of her, as if he only noticed the proximity just now. She put a loose strain of hair of her ponytail behind her ear as she took a step back. "We have to stop meeting like this." A chuckle escaped the man as he opened his mouth to say something. "Odo?" The yell startled both of them as they both looked towards the origin of the sound, which appeared to be behind him. The small curse escaped the man and she shifted her gaze towards him again. She noticed he was frowning. "Shudo, where are you?" Shudo? Was that his name? There seemed to be no concern in the voice, only slight annoyance, but before she could analyze what was really going on, she felt him grab her hand and uttered a single word. Run. He ran past her, and before she processed what had happened, he had pulled after him. They sped down the corridor and up the stairs of the huge building. The mansion they were currently in was huge and seemed to function as a hotel of some kind, for from what she could tell by the blur of the doors, they seemed to be numbered. He suddenly stopped near one of them and opened it quickly. He walked inside and she followed swiftly. The room was dark, so she couldn't really tell what was in it yet, because he closed the door as quickly as it had opened and pressed her and himself against the door. They were both breathing heavily, and she vaguely noticed him pressing her against the door. She tried to look around, but only the moon seemed to illuminate the room. She therefore turned towards the man in question. What was Dash? He suddenly put a hand in front of her mouth and put his finger with his other hand against his lips in a hushing gesture. She fell quiet as she tried her best not to blush by his close proximity and his warm hand against her lips. She simply nodded and listened. She suddenly heard footsteps faintly in the beginning of the hall. Search the rooms, he couldn't have gotten far. It was the same voice she had heard before. She looked down at the doorknob, which was right next to her hand. She lifted her hand and twisted the keys slowly into the lock, giving them a soft click of satisfaction. A few seconds later, she felt someone rattle the door and then continue on. She then looked up and noticed he was smiling at her, gratitude clearly showing on his face. Time seemed to pass slowly, and what had seemed like an eternity, she finally noticed something important. She had been holding her breath from the moment he put his hand on her lips. This, paired with the run they had just done, meant she was out of breath to begin with, which brought her to her next dilemma. She needed to breathe. She tried to grab his attention and put her hand around his arm, but he seemed oblivious to her problem and simply continued to stare at the door as if he could see through it. She tried to breathe through her nose, but his hand was rather large as he was a man, making the task harder, and she was panicking a little. Deprived of air and not thinking straight, she did the only thing she could think of to try and grab his attention. So she closed her eyes and… Shudo didn't expect to run into her quite like that. He didn't expect to run into her at all. Not that he had much time to process what had happened, for at the moment he was too focused on keeping silent and staying hidden. He strained his ears to listen what was happening in the hallway. After what seemed like an eternity, he figured they had passed far enough to be safe. He sighed in relief and turned to the girl he had so graciously pinned against the door. Okay, they seemed to have Pa Dash, but he felt something unexpected. His eyes widened and retracted his hand immediately. He stared at her wide-eyed and noticed she breathed in rather loudly. Did you just dash? He started and then stared to his hand, not sure if to be disgusted or to be blushing. You liked my hand? He stated. I'm sorry, but I needed air. She looked at him with big eyes. He wasn't sure if it was amusement or guilt or a mixture of both. But the glare alone made his heart skip a beat. She suddenly reached for something near her thigh. He followed the movement, which caused him to finally notice what she was wearing. What was she wearing? He had never, ever seen a dress like that before. But she looked good in it. Very good even. As he drank in the image, he suddenly felt guilty about staring too much, and a little protective. Wasn't she cold? Why would she wear a cleavage like that? Was it another fashion statement? Perhaps his eyes were playing tricks on him. It was dark after all. As his mind was currently occupied, he almost missed the fact that she had taken his hand once again until he felt a cool liquid into his palm. Here, it's disinfectant, she explained as she massaged the liquid onto his hand. Too flabbergasted about everything what was happening, he let her. The gesture was soothing and he felt himself relax. She suddenly stopped and handed him a napkin of sorts. It was the same blue color as her ponytail ribbon had been in her last dress. Was it her favorite color? You can use this to wipe it off if you like. She took a step back and he suddenly wondered where she got all of that material. After all, she wasn't wearing much. And the dress was pretty tight around her body, so not much hiding places. Could she make stuff appear? Feeling his mind wander to somewhere he shouldn't, he shook his head and took the napkin. Thanks. She cleared her throat and clicked on the light. So, she started as she walked around the room. She placed herself on the foot end of the double bed that seemed to fill the room. Shudo, huh? She looked at him with an eyebrow raised. Great, thanks Toga. Not the way he wanted her to find out his name. He looked down at the napkin he was holding and noticed something on it. He held closer to his eyes and noticed the letters Y and M in nice embroidery. You have me at a disadvantage. He smiled and held up the napkin. All I have is Y and M? She looked startled and then bit her lip looking towards the window. He couldn't help but think she looked cute just now. Yamamo, she answered him, but her voice was so soft he almost didn't catch it. He blinked twice and then smiled. I didn't expect you to tell me so easily. He joined her on the bed, but left a respectable distance between them. It's only fair, it's a nickname though. She explained as she looked back at him. He only nodded. So, do I get to call the police on you? Or on them? She gestured the door with her head and a smile. He sighed. Right that. Time to explain. As you probably noticed, she's not an ordinary woman. He started, and Yamamo nodded. She put her hands near her sides as she leaned back a little leisurely. He looked away. Didn't she know her outfit made it hard to focus? He tried to look at her face but figured it was easier to just look in front of him. He leaned with his elbows on his legs and put both his hands together as he explained how he met her on an arranged marriage date and how she had been very clingy towards him. And when we met again today, she kind of quite literally put her hand on my behind. He heard her gasp and turned to her surprised. He felt his heart warm up a bit. He kind of expected her to laugh at him, but she seemed to take him quite seriously. This made him feel at ease. That's SXL assault. She seemed a little angry. He smiled sadly. Try and explain that to other people. He shrugged. She crossed her arms and nodded. Her silence urged him to continue. So when I told her, no, as politely as I could, she wouldn't take it. He sighed and closed his eyes. She stared at him wide-eyed. I would have just slapped her. He chuckled at the thought. That would have been nice, but sadly I cannot do that. He put his fingers against each other and stared at them. Our fathers are business partners, you see, and I can't really insult her. She opened her mouth to protest, but seemed to think twice about it and simply nodded. So I did the next best thing, and the only not very manly thing I could. He smiled at her awkwardly. She nodded sympathetically. You ran. He let his head hang. I ran. Into me. She chuckled. The sound made his stomach jump, and he looked up at her. She had her hand to her mouth as she giggled into her fist. Yes, into you. He smiled too. You had startled me, so I wasn't really thinking straight. Sorry for dragging you with me. She smiled at him. It's all right, I got your name out of it. He lifted his eyebrow. Did she want to know his name? Was she possibly also wondering about him? Well, I got yours too, so it's a win-win. He grinned. She seemed startled and cleared her throat. He watched her as she stood up and walked towards the window. She opened it and stared outside. I'd actually like to thank you for getting me out of there. She sighed. He felt his stomach drop. You didn't want to come? He joined her near the window. She looked down towards the dome below. It was bright and lit, and you could see the people below talking and dancing. Soft music reached their ears. Her face twisted into a grin, but it was more like an annoyed one. It's not that. He noticed her shiver a little. He swiftly took of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She held one side of it surprised and looked at him. He simply shrugged and smiled. She smiled back and gave him a soft thanks as they both looked at the dome again. It's my mother. She just stared in front of her. As you probably already noticed, my dress style isn't that normal. She let a wry smile grace her features. He wanted to say something but decided against it. He simply nodded. When we first met, I was rebelling against my mother for forcing me to come to these parties. She continued. But she found out and made me wear this. I'm a little scared to go back in there. He nodded again. For people like that purple-haired man. She looked at him surprised. You're quick to catch on, it's my own fault really. I shouldn't have rebelled in the first place. He simply nodded once more, to let her know he understood. They fell into a comfortable silence as they stared at the dome. You know what I hate about these parties the most? She was still looking at the dome. He turned to look at her, waiting for her to continue. The politics involved. He rose an eyebrow and she looked at him before she continued. She then gestured her hand towards the dome. Like, you're supposed to know all of the faces involved, so you don't make a fool out of yourself against the wrong person. Before he could answer, however, she continued. He felt the frustration in her voice, so he let her. There's this guy, I have a business meeting with him next week. But I have no idea what he looks like. But I'm not supposed to insult him, because that would cause a lot of problems for my family. How do I know I haven't insulted his rich stuffed snobby but already? She had her arms crossed while she leaned on the windowsill. But she dropped her head in her arms with an obviously annoyed, ugh. He chuckled at her frustration and put a comforting hand on her arm. She looked up at him a little startled but let him. It's another reason I'm scared to go back. She sighed. I think I get what you mean. He turned towards the dome. At least you don't know if you haven't or have insulted him. I, on the other hand, am already doomed. She smiled at him sadly. He tried to console her further with a joke. I mean, how do you politely refuse a woman without insulting her? She looked at the sky pensively. He noticed her thinking. Cursing to himself, he didn't expect her to take the question seriously. He simply wanted to try and make her feel better, and that she was not the only one. But before he could explain that, she suddenly looked at him. It might sound stupid, but I might be able to help you there. She smiled. He stared at her, waiting for her to continue. Can you dance? She turned to him with a grin. He simply stared at her with his mouth agape and blinked twice. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked her as they walked back towards the door. Only if you are. She answered as she returned the jacket to him. She tightened her shawl around her shoulders. Shudo thought about it as he put the jacket back on. Was he? Did she know what would happen if they did? What would happen actually? A small ping interrupted his thoughts and he quickly reached for his phone. She did the same. It's me. She held it up and typed something in it. Sorry, I just have to tell my Jairu that I found you. Oh, the girl from the other party? He replied. She nodded and continued to type. But his mind lagged a little and he felt himself get warm. He didn't mean to blurt it out, but his curiosity got the better of him. Wait, you were looking for me? He rose an eyebrow. He noticed she turned bright red. Yamamo, you are an idiot. She thought to herself as she hid her face behind her phone. What would she say now? Of course I've been looking for you because I've been looking forward to this for 3 months? Did that make her a stalker? Wait, how could she be a stalker if she didn't even know his name? Ugh, she had to still answer his question. But she didn't want to lie to him. Okay then, part of the truth. She lowered her phone and looked at him. He was patiently waiting for an answer as he stared at her questioningly. She put away the phone and bit her lip. Jairo was worried about the dress, and hence you rescued me the last time? She shrugged. He nodded. Well, I didn't really do anything. He put his hand on the back of his neck awkwardly. But thank her for the vote of confidence. I'll try my best to ward off the perverts. She smiled gratefully. Thank you. She smiled. He suddenly turned away rather quickly and put his hand on the door. We should get going. She wondered why he suddenly seemed so eager, but she decided he probably wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. She felt a little happy that she could finally do something in return for him, but she did feel a little shy about the whole thing. At least this time she knew his name. She watched him open the door and peek outside of the creek. Once he decided the coast was clear, he opened the door fully and held out his hand. Ladies first. He smiled. She blinked twice and then smiled at him. She wasn't used to the gesture as no one did this anymore, so she took his outstretched hand with a small curtsy. Aren't you the gentleman? She smiled up at him as she passed. Got to live up to the name. He shrugged and he smiled back. She replied him with a chuckle as they left the room to head back to the ballroom. As they reached the stairs, he stopped in his tracks and turned toward her. Yamamo, you probably already know this, but I have to ask. He started. She stopped and looked at him. She waited for him to continue. I'm quite famous, so after this, you might find out my full name. He bit his lip and looked at her. She simply smiled. Could he be more famous than her perhaps? She doubted it. Well, I have news for you, mister. She pressed her finger to his chest. I've got quite the name myself, so you might find out about mine first. He seemed very surprised at that, but he quickly regained his usual stoic expression. He even graced her with a rare grin. This made her heart skip a beat. Only you could make this into a contest. Very well. We'll see who's the most famous. He continued down the stairs. Followed promptly, "You've got yourself a contest, Shudo." "We'll see." He answered her. As she looked at his broad back, she could only smile to herself. Either way, after today, one of them isn't going to be able to hide their identity. This made everything even more excited. They reached the ballroom way too soon for her liking, and he turned to her again. He held out his hand once more. "Shall we?" She smiled and nodded. They entered the room again, and she noticed a lot of heads turned towards them again, but she wasn't sure which of the two they were looking at. As they had discussed, they waited for a song to end and a new one to begin before he turned to her. He bowed and held out an outstretched hand. "May I have this dance, my lady?" She blushed a little. She knew she told him to make it a grand gesture, but did he have to be so charming too? She took his hand, however, and curtsied once more. "I'd be delighted." She smiled at him, and he led her towards the dance floor. Soft music began to play, but she only had eyes for him as he whispered near her ear. "Are you ready?" She tried to keep her blushing in check, but it was really hard as he was now closely next to her. She nodded once and looked down shyly. What was wrong with her? She had taken dance classes, and she knew she was rather good at them. But this man and his charms were throwing her off guard. She stifled a gasp when he slid his arm respectfully around her waist and urged her closer to him. She complied and let her hand slide onto his arm. His other hand took hers as he held it up, and he slowly guided her into a waltz. Oh, the irony! She swore to Jairu that she hated the waltz. It was way too complicated, and she was so sure she would never like to do this dance with anyone, ever. That was until she met Shudo. She looked up at him as he focused on her. He seemed to be such a natural at this as they glided across the room. She didn't even have to think about the steps as he led the dance perfectly. She felt herself get dizzy from all the turning and probably from everything that had happened till now. So she decided to focus to her surroundings before she lost herself into the bliss. She could tell people were staring at them and whispering things. She wasn't sure what they were whispering, but she knew it was about them. She suddenly wondered if he really could be more famous than her after all. Until she noticed a blonde woman, exactly like he had described, look at them with such venom in her eyes. She couldn't help but let out a chuckle. He seemed to have heard it. "What's the matter?" She smiled up at him. "Our plan is working. I think she saw you." He rose his head slowly, as to not let it notice, and roamed his eyes around the dance floor. He noticed her standing near the door, an insulted look on her face as she turned towards a man next to her. The man seemed to be startled as he hastily gestured towards the dance floor. Shudo felt himself smile, but he also felt something else. She suddenly leaned her head against his chest in a loving gesture. He felt a blush come up and panic a little. He had no idea how to handle this situation. "Play along," she whispered. He swallowed once and nodded as felt her hair tickle his chin. "Come on, Shudo. Get a grip." He tried to concentrate on the steps, but all he could do was drink in the sweet smell of her perfume. Shaking his head to keep himself to the plan, he dared to look around once more. He saw Toga finally notice their close proximity and how her face turned into anger. She suddenly turned and stomped off towards the exit, leaving a flabbergasted man running after her. He gave a small smile and turned his head down to tell the girl in his arms the good news. But before he could, she threw him off guard once more. "Shudo," the way she whispered his name made a shiver go over his spine. "Yes." He tried to keep his voice as steady as possible. "You smell good." She sighed. Shudo felt himself get hot inside. He had never blushed so hard in his life and felt lucky she wasn't looking up. Trying to keep his head cool, he swallowed openly. He didn't know why he said the next words, but they just felt nice and very fitting. He would never forget this day, and he would perhaps give the bottle another chance. "So do you, Yamamo." Elevators, papers, parents, and a magazine. All that's needed for a big and messy reveal. Note: for those who read the previous chapter before the 18th of July, a slight change has been made on the window scene. Nothing major, it's just a little joke in this chapter that returns and I forgot to add it in the previous chapter before I uploaded it. If you read it after this date, it has already been edited so you will get it. Oh. Please enjoy the chapter. Momo was feeling a little nervous. She looked up at the huge dome above her as she walked through the nearly empty mall. She noticed vendors putting up their street signs as they started opening their doors, and she smiled politely at those that greeted her. She continued to walk as she looked around, wondering how long it would take for her to reach the center of the mall. She noticed how smart it had been to put the business offices in the middle, so that almost every employee had to pass through at least half of the shopping mall before they reached their destination. She chuckled to herself, thinking it was typical for a business director to come up with something like this. Of course, the owners had their own private parking, smack in the middle of the mall, below everything else, whereas most of the employees or visitors had to park in the underground parkings near the sides. She could have parked in the middle as well, as she had been an invited business guest, but she preferred to catch the view and the feel of the mall itself, so she could prepare herself should they ask questions about it. She stopped near a window when she saw herself in the reflection to see if everything was still in order. She put down her briefcase to straighten her gray jacket and redo her ponytail. She then pulled down her matching gray skirt that had ridden up a little, and if her black pumps were still as spotless as before. Momo breathed in and out again, content with her reflection. She could do this. When she picked up her briefcase and took a step again, she stopped when she noticed the window she had stopped before was a bookshop, and something in the showcase caught her eye. She nearly pushed her face against the window to read the title of a cover more clearly. Yes, she saw that correctly. Momo checked her watch. She had enough time to wait for the store to open and still make it to the meeting she was supposed to attend. She would easily wait 10 more minutes. So she leaned with her back against the window and stared up at the 30 stories high building in the middle of the dome that rose up above everything. She wondered in awe what she was even doing here and if she would be able to sell herself as well as her mother hoped. No, this was her chance to prove to them that she could do this. She clenched her fist and looked at it as she stood up straight again. She felt more than ready. She would show this harsh world that Yaoyorozu Momo had finally brought out a line of clothing and that it would sell no matter which location. So why not aim for the top one? A sharp ringing of a bell startled her as she looked sideways at the store clerk, whom seemed surprised to see her. She smiled at him politely as she asked for a magazine that was in the showcase. After leaving the shop with the magazine in her hand, Momo quickened her pace to make up for the lost time so she could leisurely skim through the magazine, in search for the article that had caught her eye. She held up the magazine with a smile. She didn't usually read these gossip magazines, but she had been looking for anything related to 2 days ago. It had been a Saturday evening, which meant on a Sunday, no releases. So today, on a Monday, the first prince of this weekend's party should be in at least one of them. And as she knew the Todoroki boy had been to her party, perhaps something about her mystery man should be in this magazine as well. She smiled to herself, feeling a little proud. There was no way Shudo would have gotten her hands on this information first. She didn't peg him as a magazine reader either, but perhaps he might have been just as interested in this whole affair as she was. She hugged the magazine as she thought about the evening itself. A small blush crept up her cheeks when she thought back on how close they had danced. Sure, it was to help him get rid of a stuck-up woman that he couldn't refuse. But still, she couldn't help but feel a tiny bit of hope bloom as they had danced long after that said woman had disappeared through the front door. Shaking her head to keep herself focused, she stood up straight again and regarded the cover of the magazine. She read the cover as she reached the elevator near the building and had pressed the button going up. Youngest Todoroki boy finally gets a girlfriend? She chuckled. It was a small headline near the bottom of the page. She found it funny as this was actually huge news, but they also knew that any news or gossip about the Todorokis never stayed on covers long. As the CEO of the company, Endeavor himself, immediately forbade any news being spread about them before it reached him first. That's why most gossip magazines never included pictures or big headlines on covers, hoping to escape the ever-watching eye of the CEO. It never worked off course, but at least she already had her hand on this one. Plus, she wasn't interested about that. It only made her sure about the fact that at least Shudo or her would be mentioned inside. As the elevator door opened, she stepped inside and pressed the 20 button. She checked herself in the mirror again and sighed with relief she made it in time. She looked at the magazine once more as the elevator moved up. Should she read it now? Or after the meeting? What harm could it do to read it now? She was curious beyond belief, and it would only distract her anyway. So she opened the magazine and started looking for the headline she wanted to read. Shudo stifled a yawn as he closed the door behind him. He sighed once as he held up a clipboard he had just received from his father. On it were at least 30 papers he had to go through before the next meeting. He checked his watch. More than an hour left. Plenty of time. He straightened up and stretched himself out as he walked towards the elevator. His next meeting would be on the floor he was on now, but he wanted to get himself something to eat first. His father had made him sit through 2 excruciatingly boring meetings just now before he even had a chance to get a decent breakfast. So he took the only chances he had to at least grab a small bite. He pressed the elevator button as he reached it and looked at the clipboard once more. At least this next meeting would prove to be at least a bit entertaining. He shouldn't laugh, but most of the people on this clipboard were unexperienced first-timers who had come to sell their product to the company. It's a little thing his father came up with. Owning several malls around the country and out, naturally they had to know which shops were in it, and which were doing well or not. So when one had to disappear for any reason, could be bankruptcy, even though he was proud of the company and the honesty they shared, they always helped their stores to the utmost abilities. Which is one of the reasons everyone wanted a spot in the mall. If it was the first, it was usually paired with drags, or other things that were not legal. In that case the company took action and closed the store itself. But most of the cases it was retirement. And being around as long as they were, there were always a few each year. Which meant new stores would have to come in place. This is where Shudo came in. Being new himself, 3 years of excellent meetings and numerous projects on his name still counted as new. Apparently, he was in charge of a little program that held place once every 6 months. This consisted for multiple reasons. The main reason was to bring more youngsters, as his father would call it, to the mall. And what better idea to bring youngsters to the shops as to let youngsters run them. And so we come to the meeting that was supposed to take place in 1 hour. He regarded the clipboard and opened it to stare at the first paper. A boy was on it. He looked sturdy and had rather thick lips. His hair was spiky brown and he had a confident look on him. Shudo read his name, Rikido Sato. Shudo scanned the page. Apparently he was from a family of bakeries and wanted to open one on his own called Sugar Rush. Shudo rose an eyebrow at the name. A few pictures of pastries were viewable and a sketch of the bakery. They did seem sugary indeed. He wondered how the health inspection let this one pass. He skimmed the pages. It was no surprise to him how young everyone looked. This was another reason for the meetings. It's hard to grow on your own when you live under your family's shadow. Shudo was the perfect example of that. So this was a way of helping them on his path. And part of the reason he agreed to screen all of them in a meeting where all of them would present themselves in the big theater-type room and make their case. So far 5 spots were available, and Shudo had to fill them in. So this meant a long and boring morning listening to 30 people trying to convince him why their store would make it above the others. He skimmed the pages, roaming his hands through the edges, and closed the clipboard with a sigh. He frowned at something, thinking he had seen it wrong. So he opened it again and skimmed to the pages more slowly until he stopped near one of them, his eyes opening wide. He almost yanked all of them loose out of the clip in his haste as he scanned the name on top of the page. He was reading it so intently he never heard the elevator bing and someone step out until he clashed against them. Momo looked at the magazine index as the elevator started humming in action. She looked for the headline she wanted and saw it on page. She quickly started skimming the pages, cursing this stupid magazine for only having page numbers only every 4 pages or so, leaving her on page 20 before skimming back. She was so entranced in her case that she only vaguely noticed the elevator ding and quickly looked up to see if she was on the right floor. The elevator light was on 20, so she nodded contently as she turned to her magazine again. She was about to open the magazine at the right page as she stepped out of the elevator, too engrossed in her quest to not see the man in front of her until she bumped into him. It wasn't a hard bump, But she was so startled they both fell backwards, hitting their butts on the floor. Paper was surrounding them as it flew everywhere, and her magazine was nowhere to be seen. But frankly, she didn't care about it anymore as she took in who was sitting in front of her, probably looking just as flabbergasted as she was. Through the floating papers she made out the red and white streaks of hair as her eyes widened in recognition. Everything seemed as if in slow motion as she pointed towards the person in front of her, knowing fully aware that this was not polite, but she didn't care because at the moment as he was mimicking her movement. His heterochromatic eyes were mimicking her black ones in shock. Shudo? Yamamo? It had been said in sync. Shudo had been the first to recover as he shook his head and quickly got up as if his breaths had been on fire. He disregarded the pieces of paper and stepped into the elevator to offer her his hand. Are you all right? She blinked at him once before she also regained her composure and took his outstretched hand politely, trying to keep a small blush at bay. Her heart had so been ready for this surprise encounter. He pulled her up gently and she complied. I'm sorry, I was a little engrossed in my... He put his hand at the base of his neck awkwardly until he noticed the scattered pieces around them. Papers. He ended. Momo also looked around horrified. She did this. Why was he apologizing? I should be apologizing, she interjected as she crouched down to start picking them up. He was doing the same now. I'm sorry. I was the one that ran into. She stopped herself as she had picked up a handful of pieces and stacked them in her other hand only to stop as soon as she picked up one in particular. She stood up straight again and looked from the paper to him. Boo. He rose together with her as he had picked up the rest and was putting them back on the clipboard. He stared at her with an awkward smile, noticing what she was holding, not really sure how to react. Why, you know? She stammered at him. Only just found out actually, right before we slammed into each other. Again. He tried to lighten the mood, but clearly it wasn't working as she was simply staring at herself on the paper. She cleared her throat and made an awkward smile while returning the stack. Her brain was working a mile a minute. Why did he have her data? Why did he have all of the candidates' data? Was he also a candidate? Was he a rival of her now? He slowly took the pile from her and watched her as she was trying to figure everything out. As he slowly accepted the papers, he seemed very occupied in placing them back carefully onto the clipboard. She turned to stare at him, her eyes widening. She was still racking her mind until something clicked inside. This wasn't it. It couldn't be. You're... She stammered. He cleared his throat and smiled at her shyly. Yeah, it looks like you're my 10 o'clock Miss Yayorozu. She took a step back and put her hand to her forehead slowly. This wasn't happening. Her whole world started spinning as everything seemed to fall into place. The first party, why she hadn't seen him before that. The second party, why she didn't see him at first but everyone seemed to have seen him. Why the name kept popping up as soon as they started dancing. She took another step back, almost tripping again over her own briefcase as he reached for her to keep her uptight. He closed his hand around her wrist as she herself leaned her other hand against the elevator wall. His other hand was behind her back for comfort. Feeling the clipboard against her back, she regarded the man again. Are you all right? He asked her. This was just her luck. The only boy she did not want to meet turned out to be the boy she had been wanting to meet for over 3 months. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. She was supposed to make a good impression on him, not ruin every chance she had for a job, embarrass her family, and embarrass herself. She could go on, but before she could beat herself up even more, however, a small ding interrupted her train of thought. They both looked up as the doors of the elevator opened again, not even noticing they had closed in the first place, nor when the elevator had started moving. To tip off the cake, she wasn't even sure any more about what startled her the most. Running into Shudo? Hoping he wasn't who she thought he was? The fact that the person entering the elevator wasn't who she thought it was, and least of all, what the heck was her mother doing next to the big boss, CEO of Todoroki Incorporated, and president of the biggest mall of the country, none other than Mr. Endeavor Todoroki himself? Shudo! The heavy voice vibrated through the air, stiffening both of them. Father! The young man replied as he bowed his head a little, his eyes never leaving the imposing figure in front of them. Momo's gaze shifted from both the tall, red-haired man to the two-toned-haired man in back. She felt her hairs spring up right and withheld a shiver from the tension in the air as she regarded the two men. She wasn't sure if she felt her heart sink from Shudo acknowledging her suspicions or from the fact that neither of them seemed to want to be in the other's presence. "Momo? Are you all right?" Momo flinched at the mention of her name and turned to her mother. She took in a deep breath and gathered her thoughts before answering. "Yes, mother." She crouched again to pick up her briefcase and stood up straight with a smile. "The elevator pressure made me lose my balance." She gave Shudo a knowing look as he simply rose an eyebrow at her. He let her go and stood up straight again. He then turned to her mother with a bow. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Yayorozu." Her mother blinked once and put her hand up to her cheek with a smile. "My, what a gentleman. Nice to meet you too." It was Momo's turn to raise an eyebrow. She didn't know Shudo could be so smooth. But she was grateful for the distraction. Then she noticed he was actually smiling at her in the bow. It was a coy smile. Was this a challenge? "I don't believe you've met my daughter yet, Mr. Todoroki." The woman gestured to Momo with a smile. She was looking at the red-haired man. If the low grunt the man gave was anything to go by, Momo thought this was her cue. She gave a curtsy to him and bowed her head a little. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Todoroki." Shudo suddenly coughed, although it sounded more like he was covering up a snort. Momo turned to him with a sly smile. Was he laughing at her because she tried to one-up him in a greeting? Not noticing the glare they were getting, Endeavor made himself heard. "Have you two met before?" The question startled both of them. Shudo seemed to be the first to recover as he nodded. "Twice, actually. At the parties." Mr. Todoroki nodded shortly as if approving. Momo simply watched the exchange with wide eyes. Feeling her mother's eyes bore into her for questions, she concluded now was the best time to get out of there before she would have to answer something she didn't like. She quickly looked at the floor they were on and saw the number around 1 light up. Feeling relieved, she concluded this was most likely the floor with some food on it. She needed coffee stat. Shudo opened his mouth to say something, but she cut him off. "Actually, I asked him the way to the cafeteria, just now." She quickly interjected before him. He blinked at her twice. Obviously not getting the fact that Momo's blatant lie was just to get them out of here. This man had no idea what her mother was capable of. So she pushed the case a little in a small panic. Just a small one. Small enough to make a mistake apparently. She took his hand and dragged him out of the elevator to prove her point. "Right, Shudo?" The mention of his name seemed to have done the thing as he let her drag him out of it. "Yamamo, wait." He called after her. But they had already turned a corner before the man had any chance of retaliating. The elevator door closed on them as both parents simply stared at the now empty hallway. Endeavor had already pressed the 20 button before they had started the conversation, so the machine started running as soon as the door closed. "I'm sorry, I must have heard it wrong. But did my daughter just call your son Shudo?" If Endeavor had heard her, he didn't show. He simply turned his head towards the woman next to him and uttered a single word with a raised brow. "Yamamo." The woman's head also turned towards the man, her eyes widening at the mention of her daughter's nickname. Both were lost in thought as the elevator door dinged open again and Endeavor stepped out, only to hear something crunch under his foot. He looked down to see a magazine lying open on the floor and he bent down to pick it up. He stared at the open page as he made out the unmistakable face of his son that covered 2 whole pages. In his arms was the familiar raven-haired girl he had seen seconds before. He heard the woman next to him gasp with an "oh my" as he read the title of the article. "Youngest Todoroki boy finally gets a girlfriend?" and the subtitle. "Party in full swing, as Todoroki Shudo finally makes a move." He slowly turned to the woman next to him as he noticed she had started to smile. The smile slowly turned to a grin. He couldn't help but grin as well, as a plan started formulating in his head. Shudo stared at the girl in front of her. Not polite, he knew, but she seemed way too preoccupied to notice. She had been poking her coffee with a spoon for at least 10 minutes now as they sat there in silence. He found it intriguing how her expressions kept changing as she seemed to be lost in thought. He regarded her outfit as she mused in silence. He had seen her wear 3 different styles in total, and he couldn't help but think she rocked all 3 of them with flair. Now he didn't know much about fashion. But that he didn't see sooner that this woman in front of him was a designer? He must have been blind. Oddly enough, this obvious business outfit? I think he liked this one the most. He liked the other outfits, sure. But those had been open. To say he didn't like those would be to question his manhood. But for some reason he didn't seem to like the fact that not only him, but a lot of other people could see what he was seeing. Like that little purple pervert, for a lack of another name, for example. The way the vest seemed to curve around her enough to make out her distinct feminine shape. Or the knee-high skirt that closed around her, other curves? Oh, for FCK's sake, yes, he had been staring at her, but he was still a young man and she was nothing if not gorgeous. And hot. And his type. Did he have a type? He didn't know. But he was finding out. He really liked this outfit on her. You could tell she was shaped, but he found it more alluring if you saw less, to be honest. Might be strange, but it left more to the imagination. When did he turn into such a pervert? Okay, stopping this train of thought right now. To make matters worse, once they had reached their seats, the first thing she did was take off her vest. So now he was staring at a white, way too thin blouse that clinged to her every curve. This woman obviously didn't know what she was doing to him. Trying to find something to break the silence, Shudo cursed himself for being socially awkward enough to not being able to express himself. His worst idea, though, is the next one. The idea to crack a joke never hurt a fly, right? Except for the fact that his sense of humor had never been the best. He should have known that. But still. So. He broke the silence and he noticed her head whipped up towards him pretty fast, as if she had forgotten he was sitting in front of him in the slightly busy cafeteria. About insulting my rich stuffed snobby butt? He asked with a smile. You were doing pretty great until you said that, to honest. He wanted to pat himself on the back for that one. One of his better jokes. At least until he heard the groan that emanated from the girl as she hit her head against the table pretty roughly to let her head hang. His eyes widened immediately as he reached for her, but he was too late to do anything about it. It was a joke. Relax. He was panicking now. She rose her head a little and was greeted with an awkward smile. I'm sorry I said that. I didn't know I was talking about you at the time. He sat back into his seat fully. Yeah, I figured. She sat up too and regarded him silently. At least we finally know who is more popular, right? He gave her another one of his awkward smiles. She also smiled at that. That's an understatement, she started. But her face quickly changed into a surprised one. The gasp she let out startled him as she stood up quickly enough to make her seat topple behind her. The magazine! She exclaimed. As she strode past him, he quickly reached for her hand to stop her. Not sure what had just happened. He decided he'd let her calm down first and explain, before he rushed after her once more. She stopped when she felt his hand on her wrist and looked down at it before she looked at him, fear clearly present in her eyes. What magazine? He offered. Her eyes darted around the room. The magazine I bought this morning. Clearly impatient with his calm behavior. He looked at her questioningly. I was readying it before I bumped into you. She looked at him again with a little annoyance. I didn't see a magazine in the elevator. He tried to assure her. What could possibly be so urgent about a magazine? It must still be on the floor. She calmed down a little. But then panic rose again and she turned to him fully. She put her other hand on the one that was holding her wrist. Todoroki-kun. She corrected herself. What floor were our parents headed? He flinched at the mention of his name, feeling a little sad about the fact they were no longer on a first-name basis. He understood why she needed to change that fact, now that their identities were known, but she could at least still call him Shudo when they were alone. He needed to make that clear to her. Please still call me Shudo when we are alone. I'm not really fond of my last name, to be honest. He looked at her sadly. She seemed startled by the suggestion but nodded slowly. And I believe it was the 20th floor. He answered her question. Her legs seemed to give out on her as he reacted quickly enough to hit an arm around her waist to catch her. What is it with them and running into each other or falling over? This is bad. This is really bad. She muttered as he led her towards her chair again. He balanced his foot enough to lift up the chair to its original state and helped her sit down again. He wondered what could possibly be so bad about a magazine. And their parents seeing it? When he had sat her down, he was about to turn to his place to ask her just that, but she had grabbed his sleeve in panic. Shudo, what if they find it? He kneeled before her, holding her hand in both of his. Yamamo. He tried, checking to see if he was still allowed to call her that. She flinched a little but didn't object. Care to tell me what this is about? Her face flushed a little and he couldn't help but think that she was cute. She nodded and he let go of her hands to return to his seat. She started talking immediately when he sat down. This morning, I took a walk through the mall to try and catch a vibe from it. He nodded at her, thinking it was a little impressive. She was really serious about this job, wasn't she? I passed a bookshop and bought a magazine. She continued. He noticed how she started talking faster and faster, as if she was embarrassed about something and wanted to get it over quickly. I bought it because of the small bet we made, but of course I didn't know who you were back then. But I knew the Todoroki boy, meaning you, which I didn't know, was on the party and his name was in the title. Now she was rambling. He withheld a chuckle until he let the words sink in. Wait. He interrupted her, holding one hand up. My name was on the cover. She suddenly turned a lovely shape of pink that even covered her ears and nodded. That was impossible. His father strictly forbade anything that was even remotely connected to his name and gossip. And why was she blushing so fiercely? Even though it was adorable. He felt like he needed more information. What was the title? He asked her. She hid her face behind her hands. Youngest Todoroki boy finally gets a girlfriend? She quietly said. He almost didn't catch it. He stared at her pensively. He didn't get a girlfriend? Where did that gossip come from? He felt the click in his head as he slowly leant back in his seat. I bought it because I saw your name. And I thought it might contain some information about the party we were on. But I didn't expect the article to be about. She stopped as she swallowed, her face still half hidden behind her hands. Now it was his turn to blush as he filled in the blanks. The article would be about them. She was the girlfriend they were talking about. He ended her sentence slowly. She nodded as she let her hands fall onto the table slowly. He let his hand go through his hair as he was lost in thought. This magazine was dangerous. And if it's anything magazines loved more than gossip, it was photographic materials. And if they have gotten a hold of a picture of them dancing the way they did without any real story, things could turn out for the worse if his father was involved. He finally understood her panic. He let out a silent curse and noticed how this startled her. Turning to her again, he decided now wasn't the time for rash behavior. Sorry. She shook her head. I'm the one who is sorry. I should have never bought it. But I was a little curious about your identity. I didn't know I would find it out before I had gotten the chance of having a look at it. He nodded to her, still lost in thought. He then sighed as he leaned back once more. Nothing we can do about it at the moment. They probably found it by now. He put his hand on his chin pensively. She let her head hang a little. What are we going to do now? She asked quietly. Being honest? He didn't have a clue. Somehow, they needed to convince their parents that things weren't what they would seem. Or that he didn't know actually. He couldn't deny he liked this girl. But how could anyone decide that before they had a chance to find out about that fact? It wasn't fair. Being famous wasn't fair. But then again, that's just life. Unfair. The least he could do now was try and get this girl in front of him to calm down. In any case, he got her attention again. My father will make sure nothing else spreads from those magazines until he had all of the information at hand, so we don't need to be afraid of that. For now, let's just focus on what we have to do today. And see what happens tomorrow. She slowly nodded as she let the words sink in. He tried to catch her gaze again so he could smile at her to make her feel a little better. When she finally did look at him though, she frowned. She then regarded him and let her eyes roam up and down his body. He felt a little weirded out by it, but before he could ask, she already answered him. Your outfit? She started. He felt a little relieved. She wasn't being rude, she was simply regarding him as a fashion designer. Feeling a little curious about what she would think, he pressed her. What about it? Where did you get it? She really looked surprised about it. He couldn't blame her. He was especially proud of getting it. He had never seen anything like it before, so when he saw it in a fashion show when he was skipping the TV, he knew he needed it. He'd never really liked to wear suits, but he thought this one looked comfortable. And he was right. He rarely used his Todoroki status for anything, but he didn't mind that he did it for this one, for he knew it would take a few months before these suits would be out for wear. Like it? He asked with a proud smile. I saw it on a fashion show once, they looked comfortable so I ordered the whole set. Are they? She asked, genuinely interested. Yeah, they are. And still fun too. He finished as he looked down at the black triangles on his gray suit. They were subtle and you had to look close enough to see them. But it gave the whole thing a playful vibe, yet chic enough to wear to formal occasions. He had never seen anything like it before. It suits you. Her lips turned into an amused smile. Why was she amused? Better than I thought it would. She mumbled that last part, so he wasn't sure if he heard that right. Before he could ask about it, however, she startled him again by standing up abruptly. How long do we have? She asked urgently. He quickly checked his watch. A small half hour. He answered her honestly. I need to adjust my presentation. She said more to herself than to him. Do you mind if I go up ahead? She looked at him again. He didn't see the problem. After all, he was the one that urged her to think about something else. Why not the meeting? So he shook his head, giving her an assuring smile. No, it's fine, I need to go through these anyway. He gestured the clipboard to emphasize his meaning. She slowly nodded as she picked up the briefcase and vest as she turned to the elevator again. She had to pass by him, so he watched her. Until she stopped next to him, her back slightly turned, but enough to see her bite her underlip. To do, shoulda? She corrected herself as she turned towards him. He saw doubt in her eyes. He was happy she didn't use his last name, but he felt a little uncomfortable about the way she said his name. Yes. Are we friends? She pet her head sideways, a little unsure. The question startled him. He didn't know. So he'd just answer her honestly and a little shyly. I'd like to think we are. He put his hand on the back of his neck, a little unsure. Why? Then as a friend, I'd like to ask you something. She bit her lip again. He felt himself get a little disappointed. He heard that sentence a lot, and every time it hurt to hear. Everyone who had asked that wanted to use his status and their friendship for personal gain. He'd like to think that she had been different. But apparently he had been wrong. So when she bowed towards him, he wasn't surprised. Please judge me fairly and purely on my abilities during the meeting. She uttered in the bow. Shuto stifled a gasp and nearly fell of his chair in shock. He most certainly didn't expect that. She wanted to opposite? What? Noon had asked the opposite of him. So why her? He watched her as she slowly rose again from the bow and saw the determination in her eyes. He then felt relieved and smiled at her. She obviously wanted to achieve something with her own two hands, without help from anyone, and she was afraid being friends with him would be in the way of that. He could do nothing else but admire her for this. So the answer was obvious to him as he stood up. Of course. He held out his hand towards her. I look forward to your presentation, Miss Yayorozu. She flinched at the use of her last name but smiled and adjusted quickly. She took his hand in reply and shook it firmly. Thank you, Mr. Todoroki, I won't disappoint you. He nodded in reply and smiled at her as she smiled back. They stood like that for a few seconds until he noticed a blush creep up her cheek as she regarded their joined hands. She was obviously waiting for him to retract his hand as he had been the one in upper rank. But here he was, enjoying the feel of her fingers against his palm. Idiot. He quickly retreated his hand, feeling a blush come up himself. She chuckled a little and bowed her head towards him as she hugged her suitcase towards her chest. She then turned towards the exit rather quickly. He watched her leave as a strange feeling started nagging him in his chest. He sat down again and regarded the clipboard next to him. He took it and opened it. Her face was smiling up at him in the picture. He read the top of the page. Yaoyorozu Momo, fashion designer. He wanted to read more, but his promise to her stopped him. He promised her to judge her on her abilities, right? So why not do so and not read about her presentation beforehand? Nodding to himself about the idea, he flipped the page to look at the next person to be presenting himself and started to read. He felt stupid though. Because for once, for some reason, he actually wished he could be biased about giving her a spot in the store. But he was not allowed. Maybe that was the reason? Not because he wanted a reason to continue working with her? Sighing to himself, he focused on the task at hand. Preparing for the meeting. As soon as Momo pressed the enter button, she leaned back in her seat with a sigh. Finally finished. She checked the watch on her laptop. Only 7 more minutes to go. Good thing she already went to the theater to finish her edited presentation. She closed the screen and looked around her. Slowly but surely the room started to fill, all with people who were dressed to impress. Some looked nervous and fiddled in their seats, others simply sat laid back in their chairs skimming their papers leisurely. Momo quickly counted the heads she could see, and tried to remember the amount of papers that had been on the clipboard. She counted around 30 people wanted to make a name for themselves, and after a bit of research she quickly found out 5 spots were open. That's not a lot. Taking into account that the meeting was supposed to be 3 hours that left 6 minutes to each of them. You could take longer off course should you need it. But she figured she best shouldn't. No one liked to listen to someone drone on about the same thing for a long period of time. Her specialty was to make a first impression that lasted. And she should. She did. She let her mind wander to the one place she shouldn't. The encounter this morning. Momo felt a blush come up and bit her lip to try and subdue it. This was not the time to be thinking about it. Even though she did. She couldn't help but sigh at the whole thing. Her mind kept going to all of the times they touched. She counted each of them. A total of 6 times they had touched each other. And every time she had felt her heart skip a beat. The first time was in the elevator, when he tried to lift her up. The second time was when she was stumbling backwards. Third was when she took his hand to run out. Fourth was when he took her hand to stop her. The fifth was him kneeling in front of her and taking her hands in his. Oh boy, when she remembered that once she couldn't keep her blush at bay. And last but not least, the lingering handshake. She knew she shouldn't be thinking about these things, or making a big deal out of it. But for some stupid reason she had hope. Hope that he might actually be as interested in her as she had been in him. She quietly shook her head with a smile. She was being silly. When she first found out his identity, she was so shocked she wasn't thinking straight. Panic had taken over because she had been afraid of the name, not of the man. But now that she thought about it, the way he carried himself with dignity and honor. A real gentleman to boot. She felt like an idiot for being so shocked about him being a Todoroki in the first place. Why would she think Todoroki Shudo would be a brat? Why did she need to impress him again? Was it really so bad that her Shudo was the Todoroki Shudo? Startled by her way of thinking, she held her forehead in her hand with a sigh. Don't be an idiot, Momo. You're just friends. Nothing else. There's no other reason behind it. She heard the door open again and noticed everyone stood up. She quickly did the same as she noticed none other than the man himself come in. Most of the people bowed in recognition of their ranks, others just stared with open mouth at his presence. Momo regarded him as he entered. His eyes had been closed and he stood in front of the stage. She felt something different about him. The way he carried himself and his stoic face made a shiver go over her spine. It wasn't necessarily a bad shiver. It just surprised her how different he looked just now. As he opened his eyes and looked around the room, everyone quieted down immediately. Their eyes locked briefly and Momo felt herself stiffen as she looked into his stone-cold heterochromatic eyes. They were so different than the ones she knew. It made her feel a little lost and confused, perhaps counting on the fact that she knew him and change her presentation hadn't been the best of ideas after all. A lot was riding on the fact that Shudo would react to her last slide. But the way his eyes softened ever so slightly, she almost didn't see it when they locked, made her nod in recognition. No, she shouldn't falter right now. He continued his scan around the room before nodding his appreciation. He then stepped towards a seat, placed in the middle of the theater. He opened his briefcase to take out a notebook, opened it, clicked his pen and scribbled something on it. "You may begin." His low voice vibrated through the room. It reminded her a little about how his father spoke in the elevator. Silently thinking it probably wasn't the best idea to tell him this as she looked around the room. Noon seemed to be surprised by his lone sentence. Wait, that was it? No big speech? Was she really the only one surprised about this? Someone stood up next to her and made her way towards the front of the room nervously. Her hair was green and a big mess. It reminded her a little about a forest with vines. It was hypnotizing to watch as it swished sideways until she made it towards the front of the stage. On it was a standing desk with a microphone on it. As soon as she stood on the stage, her face popped up behind her on a big screen. When she plugged in the USB on what she assumed was a laptop on the desk, another screen popped up next to her face one and it showed a computer desktop. She opened a lone file on it and a PowerPoint sprang open. Her eyes roamed the room silently and landed on Shudo. Mr. Todoroki, she corrected her way of thinking. They nodded towards each other and she started talking. Momo tried to pay attention to the girl. But as soon as 5 minutes had passed and she showed no signs of stopping, she felt her mind falter. Mental note to herself to make sure her presentation was short. Why shorter than this girl? At a certain moment she had even clasped her hands together and Momo swore a spotlight had been turned on solely on her. But when she blinked it had been gone. She repressed a sigh as she looked at the number next to her. When she entered she had to retract a number from a box. This had to be the order they had to present themselves. Hers had number. She felt relieved. She didn't need to be the first one, but no one wanted to be the last one either. Not at the rate this would be going on. When suddenly the room started clapping and the girl bowed. Momo cursed herself. She had let her mind wander. Very unprofessional. She did notice, however, Todoroki was not clapping. He was simply jotting down notes on his notebook and didn't say a word. He nodded towards the girl and she understood it as a sign to go back to her seat. The second one had been a lot shorter. It was a girl with bright orange hair in a side ponytail and a bright smile. Momo had a feeling this girl was a lot of fun to hang out with and her presentation was pleasant and short. She immediately got the gist of it and felt herself get excited. This girl was obviously a challenge to her. Perhaps if they both got a store they could be friends? No, Momo, don't get ahead of yourself. You don't have it yet. You could still fail at this miserably. Again, Todoroki-kun barely nodded. She felt herself get a little annoyed. Was he really so stoic all the time? She quietly made a promise to herself to at least get a different reaction out of him and felt herself get all fired up. Slowly but surely the third person had been coming to an end. Again, barely a nod. The fourth person, however, he didn't even nod too. She held in a chuckle as she had been sure he would be simply looking annoyed at this man. He was so full of himself and his case and the way he flipped his slick blonde hair that had been glowing in the light. His self-centered smile surely would make Todoroki-kun's blood boil as much as it did hers. When he left the stage with another flick of his hair, Momo finally realized it had been her turn. She breathed in and out once and stood up with her papers close to her chest. She took the USB stick with her and made her way to the front. As soon as she stood there, however, she felt herself get nervous. The spotlight was scorchingly hot above her as she plugged in the USB and roamed her eyes over the room. Her gaze fell on Shudo and he was looking at her with an amused raised eyebrow. His elbows were on the desk he was sitting on and his mouth was leaning against his folded hands. Again her heart skipped a beat. Why did he have to look so hot right now? Momo, you need to focus. She purposely tore her eyes away from him, even though she felt like she could look at him all day, and stacked her papers with a clear of her throat. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yayarozu Momo and I'm a fashion designer. She started. Most of you probably know my family brand name as expensive, and face it, some of the items are a little overpriced. She shrugged. She got graced with a few chuckles, exactly like she hoped. All right, she had the room. That's why I thought I'd try something different this time. She clicked the remote once and the slide with her name on changed. On it was a ballroom and it was filled with nobility and expensive clothed men. Everyone has probably been to one of these before. Overly dressed, expensive parties. She didn't wait this time to get a reaction and continued with the next slide. It is here where I got the inspiration. I've noticed male suits were not easy to come by at a reasonable price. And if you did find one, it was probably not your size or very old-fashioned. She looked up at her slide and gestured at the outfits her brand had made before. She then clicked the next slide. Of course, for us women, the same is true. Getting a suit that fits you without having to pay an arm and a leg is a deal on its own. On the slide were all old female suits that she had previously owned. Most of them looked like they had patterns on them that were made in the 70s. That's why I had the idea of creating a clothing like for men and women that's affordable and fun to wear. She clicked another slide. A few female suits were present in playful colors, but elegant nonetheless. My idea is to open up a shop that will not only let you buy and fit an outfit, but to also be able to adjust it to your body at a reasonable price. A slight murmur filled the room. Was this good or bad? She didn't really care. She got this far. And now for the finale. She clicked another slide. And on it were a few of the suits she had already designed. The idea is to have yourself an all-occasional suit that's comfortable and fun to wear. But it still makes you look fabulous. In the shop you will be able to adjust your outfit and perhaps even construct one of your own with the help of a little program that is currently under development. Another slide with suits on it. Most parts of it that looked like they could be put together with simple click. She pressed the button again and it contained the latest designs and one in particular she had enlarged. She then turned to Shudo. I even got a review of the product and I was very pleased with the outcome. But her heart sank. Shudo was not looking at the screen or her. He was taking notes in his notebook. She withheld a sigh. It had been worth a shot. She smiled at herself when she noticed the approving nods coming from the rest of the room. At least they liked the idea. Just as she had taken her papers together and opened her mouth to thank the room for their attention, she heard a small gasp. It startled her because she had not expected it, but turned to him anyway. Shudo was openly staring at the screen with his mouth in a slight O shape. She withheld herself into screaming yes, as she got a different reaction out of him than a nod, but felt her eyes go wide when he suddenly stood up, effectively silencing the room. He took off his vest slowly and held it in front of him. He took the collar in his hand and checked the label with his other. Momo felt the corner of her mouth go up a little as she tried to keep herself from smiling openly. This had been way better than she had planned. She had been satisfied with his review and his gasp. But this? Golden. He let out a small chuckle and turned to her with a sly smirk. He still didn't speak, but Momo knew he didn't need to. Everyone in the room had now known Todoroki Shudo was now wearing a Yaoyorozu original, without himself knowing it. She nodded towards him with a small smile and turned towards the room again. Thank you for your time, everyone. She stacked her papers and took out the USB stick. She bowed slightly when she stepped out of the desk and noticed Shudo's eyes had been following her as she went to her seat. She turned her head towards him as she ascended the stairs and winked at him when their eyes locked. His eyes widened and she was startled about herself. She quickly turned forwards again and quickened her pace towards her seat. Momo, you're an idiot. Why did you have to wink? After a presentation like that, Shudo had trouble paying attention to the rest of them. He forced his mind to the people in front of him, but other than a few mentionable characters, none of them stood out the way she did. He was relieved when the meeting finally ended and stood up to stretch his legs. Left the room first as this was custom, but he was dying to find Yamamoto after this. He had so much questions. His most urgent one was the wink. But would he dare to ask her? It's a good thing the whole thing got filmed, so he could watch it again to make a proper selection. His mind had been unprofessionally occupied by a certain raven-haired girl. He had finally understood why she was so interested in his outfit for today, or why she suddenly needed to change her presentation. This girl was way too clever and witted for her own good. And she would probably make it high in the business world. As he made his way to the elevator, however, he got stopped by his father as he beckoned Shudo towards him. Shudo rose his eyebrow. His father never talked to him after one of these meetings. He wondered what could be wrong now. He entered the room his father had been standing nearby too and noticed it had a few screens in it. One of them showed the room the meeting had been in, and her felt his heart sink. He had an inkling feeling his father had been watching these meetings, he just didn't have any proof. Until now. So of course he saw this performance. This coupled with the elevator incident and noticing the woman in the back of the room with a smile on her face, he knew what this is about. Shudo, my boy, you've been had. Haven't you? His father didn't even sound disappointed. He had never heard his father so amused before, and it scared him. Shudo slowly nodded. I didn't know it was her brand I was wearing, honestly. He shrugged. Endeavor nodded back to him. So this wasn't planned? Shudo shook his head. Just as Endeavor opened his mouth again to say something, the door burst open rather loudly. Mother, is everything all right? Your text said it was an emergency dash. The girl was still holding the door handle as she was breathing the words. Obviously she had been running. She silenced herself as she took in the view in front of her. A few seconds ticked by as her eyes went wide and she backed out of the room with a bow. I'm so sorry. I must have the wrong room. Her mother's chuckle in the back stopped her from leaving as she rose her head again with obvious confusion clearly written on her face. Mother! Mrs. Yayarozu stood up gracefully and walked towards her daughter. She put her hand on her shoulder with a big smile. You are in the right room, my dear. And it is an emergency. Yamamo ped her head questioningly and then turned to Shudo for answers. Shudo simply shrugged, clearly not knowing what was going on as well. Mr. Todoroki has something he'd like to ask you. She pressed her hand on the girl's shoulder a little harder and turned her around towards the big red-haired man. Shudo noticed the girl swallow visibly and withheld a chuckle. He knew firsthand how intimidating his father could be. But as soon as he saw his father smile, a shiver ran over his back. His father smiling was never a good thing. Yes, girl. Your presentation had piqued my interest, and I'm sure Shudo would like to hear more about it. Should you be willing to talk about it over dinner? Shudo felt himself get cold and hot at the same time. Hot, because dinner with Yamamo seemed like the perfect way for her to answer all his questions and perhaps another excuse to see her again. Cold, because with their parents present, this could go wrong in so many ways. Not exactly his idea of a perfect first date. Wait, why was he thinking about dates? This was purely business, right? Something in his father's eyes told him it wasn't. And he felt his heart sink. Yamamo, on the other hand, could do nothing but nod slowly. He swore she jumped up a few cm when his father clapped his hands together. Excellent. He then turned to the girl's mother. You and your husband are welcome to join us, naturally. The woman obviously faked a hand on her chest. We would be honored. You're right. This had been a setup from the start. They just needed a reason for this date to happen. And idiotically as it is, Shudo and Yamamo just gave them one. He cursed himself. He let this happen. How does tomorrow evening sound? His father spoke loud again, effectively startling Yamamo again. Shudo wasn't fazed by it. He had heard his father's voice enough to not be startled by it anymore. Mostly he took pleasure in the act that someone got startled by it. But now he only felt worse. Perfect. The woman put both hands on her daughter's shoulders and led her out of the room. Probably before the girl found her voice again to protest about the whole thing. He watched them leave and he followed his father out of the room. The woman turned to them again as his father spoke. I'll email you the details of the location. The woman nodded and let go of Yamamo. Thank you very much for the invitation. She bowed. Yamamo did the same, clearly not out of her daze yet. He felt a little sorry for her as he watched them turn around again and walk through the now empty corridor. Honestly, dear, if you had told me 3 months ago that your inspiration for this series had been this Todoroki boy, I would have supported you more openly. He heard the woman say, obviously loud enough so they could hear. This seemed to effectively slap Yamamo out of her daze, and he saw her turn her head towards her. Mother, I told you it's not like that. He saw a blush grace her cheeks. Yes, Momo. You know having a muse is nothing to be ashamed of. The woman waved her finger towards Yamamo. Yamamo, her eyes went wide and turned towards Shuto, clearly checking if he had heard. He knew he had been staring at her with his eyebrows high into his hairline. He noticed how her blush turned into a lovely shade of red that even covered her ears. She quickly turned her head away again, looking down and quickening her pace. Shudo could simply stare as he watched them turn a corner, the voice of the woman going more silent with each step. He let the words sink in. He had been a muse? He inspired her? He was the reason she had made these outfits? He heard her mumbling words echo in his head. It suits you better than I thought. He felt himself get hot inside. He had never felt this way before. So needed. So happy. So fuzzy and warm. He knew he must have been blushing badly right now. And he couldn't do anything to stop it. And the worst part? He knew his father was watching him. Note, if you are wondering, I based the suits on a brand called Opposites. Should you be interested? They are cheap and very comfy. Look them up sometime. The title says it all. Keeping your friends updated. I caved. I split the chapter up. Really was getting too long. But other than making up new titles with numbers, nothing should be different. So here you go. 10,000 words and a new record for me for you to enjoy. Momo never panicked. She was calm, collected and composed. Except now. Her house was a mess, riddled with clothes. She was a mess, because she didn't sleep. Everything was a mess. Because god darn Kyukajire had not replied to any of her calls, texts and Skype notifications for a total of 28 gosh darn hours. She was worried. Worried about her friend. She lived for her cell phone. She never left it unattended or uncharged. She was cranky, because she needed to vent about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours and had no one to confine, and she didn't sleep. Which made her stressed as well. Hungry, perhaps make that hangry, a lovely mix of everything because she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, when she was still in a lovely bliss of her what seemed like a perfectly normal life. And she was panicking. Yes, she was panicking. She only had a few more hours left before the infamous dinner date that she didn't even remember agreeing to. It had all been a blur from the moment she entered that room and she saw the CEO and his son stare at her for her probably rude behavior of not knocking before entering. Everything after that was a blank. She vaguely remembered nodding a few times, trying to catch Shudo's eyes for any type of comfort, and her mother grabbing her shoulders and turning her around a few times and out the door. The next thing she remembered was that her mother oh so graciously spilled the beans to everyone in that hallway that Shudo was the one that gave her the inspiration for the current line of Yayorozu suits. What made matters worse was that he heard it. If the surprise on his face was any indication, he probably thought she was a crazy stalker or something. First collecting data on him by grabbing the first magazine she came across that had any data on him. Next because she committed a full and complete clothing line in his image. Ugh, she just couldn't catch a break. She rested the back of her head against her door to her bedroom and slipped down into a sitting position. She checked her phone once more to see if her friend had at least shown a sign of being alive. Figuring it would be best to leave another message, she opened the chat and started typing. Normally, she would have typed something like, Kyuka, I've tried contacting you a few times but you've yet to call back. I hope you're just busy but I'm getting a little worried. Please let me know if you are alright. But she was at her limit. Kriati, if you don't sign in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police and child support to report you MIA. She pressed the enter button and sighed as she let her head hang back against the wall. A small ding had her grabbing for her phone so fast, she had almost dropped it. Uravity. Hey Yamamo, didn't she go hiking with Denki and his family? She probably doesn't have internet up there. Momo blankly stared at the screen and blinked twice before the words reached her mind fully. She then started laughing out loud. Gosh, she was an idiot. Yes, that's right. She had been nagging about the fact that Denki really wanted to go hiking with her, which was odd, because the guy loved electronics and everything that ran on electricity, or so G said. And he knew the place wouldn't have any type of power. All nature. She finally said yes after she knew, bless her soul, that Momo had been safe from the party and would be all right without her. Her words, wonderful advice and support. Oh, she's in for a surprise when she gets back. Feeling the relief wash over her, Momo suddenly felt tired. Perhaps she would finally be able to take a small nap now, or at least eat something. Until she looked at the chat again. Something was off. Ochako wasn't in this conversation and she definitely couldn't be on the internet. Her parents forbade it when she was abroad to study. She scrolled up the conversation and face-palmed. She had opened the group chat from high school they had made. The last message had been from 2 months ago, when Jairu and Denki finally started dating officially and Ochako had to leave for Europe to take her flying tests. Jiro and Momo had a separate chat room, because they didn't want to bother her. Momo noticed the 3 dots on the bottom of the screen, indicating Ochako was still typing. Uravity? Guess who is back in Japan, by the way? Momo smiled and started typing as well. Kriati? Oh my god. You're back. How did it go? Uravity? Pretty good. Finished the first tests. Have a good feeling about them. Getting back to work next month. Now I have a little break. Kriati? I'm so happy for you, I knew you could do it. Uravity? Thanks. How are you doing? I'm sensing I've missed a few things. Kriati? That's an understatement. A lot has happened. Uravity? Wanna hang? It's been ages since I've seen you. Momo looked at the chat. It's not that she didn't want to hang with Ochako, it's just that the girl was always so busy. She didn't want her problems to become hers, because she would definitely make them her own as well. She loved the girl, but perhaps telling her would not be the best idea at the moment. The girl finally had a holiday. Because if she was not in the air working as an air hostess, she was somewhere abroad, studying to be a pilot. The girl loved to be in the air. Even though it used to make her nauseous. It didn't stop her from following her dreams. And she overcame everything by sheer will alone. Momo couldn't be more proud. But Momo was also nearing her limits. While she felt less panicked because she finally felt relieved her friend was safe and feeling stupid for forgetting. She was still stressed and in desperate need of vending. Sighing to herself, she knew the girl would find out everything eventually. Might as well tell her personally. Kriati, wanna come over? I'm in desperate need of a girl talk. Uravity? Perfect. Me too. See you in 20. Momo chuckled. Yes, this was what she needed. Now, time to take a power nap. Too tired to actually move, she grabbed some clothes that were near her and hugged them close into a makeshift pillow. Should her mother see what she was doing with these overly expensive clothes, she would probably have a heart attack. But she couldn't even be bothered to care at the moment as she finally drifted off into a light slumber. Shudo pressed the doorbell and took a step back from the door politely. He took in the big house he was standing in front of. It wasn't as big as his, of course, but you couldn't exactly call it small either. He preferred this one over his either way. It why they often met here or at Midoriya's. He hated inviting people over. With the maids running all over the place to make sure their every whim was catered, they hardly had a private moment. They had made an unspoken oath to have Tuesdays off and organize a get-together once in a while. If there was no hitch-off course, Shudo could have an unscheduled meeting even though his father knew Tuesday was his free day. Or Izuki or Tenya could be called in case of emergency. Being a firefighter and police officer was a risky occupation after all. The door opened to reveal a bright pink-haired woman. She had her hair into a messy bun and her yellow eyes shined with joy. Well, if it isn't Todoroki Shudo. They are expecting you. Come on in. You know the way. She gestured inside and stepped back to make room for him to pass. Shudo held in a chuckle and continued his train of thought. Or someone could blow up the house not that unexpectedly. He nodded towards her and stepped inside. Good afternoon, Hatsum-san, thank you for having me. She beamed at him. As usual, don't you ever grow tired of saying that? But she didn't seem all that offended as she closed the front door and went the other way with a wave of her hand. And I told you to call me May. He rose an eyebrow as he routinely took of his coat and put it on the hanger in the hallway. He then turned to what he knew was the way to the kitchen and knocked on the open door. Hey guys. Good afternoon, Shudo-kun. Glad you could make it. Tenya was in the middle of making what Shudo thought was coffee, so he looked up once with a nod and then continued. Perfect, just what he needed. Izuki smiled at him from his seat, looking tired. Shudo quickly guessed he probably worked the night shift and joined him on the table. Rough night. Izuki nodded with a sigh. You can say that again. Everything all right? He asked a little concerned. It wasn't like Izuki to openly express a bad night, unless something really bad had happened. Nothing that amazing. The boy continued. A fire in a jewelry store after they raided it. Tenya handled that one, caught the perps quickly. They hid in the building across. Figured they couldn't have gotten far. The police officer shrugged as he pressed the coffee machine and it started whirring softly. They wanted to see how big the fire would spread. It was a bunch of kids really. Shudo nodded. It wasn't that weird that they saw each other in their line of work nor that Tenya caught them quickly. He was known for being one of the fastest runners on the precinct. But he still felt a little jealous each time. He knew they were professional about it. But he still wished he could see his friends more often. Alas, such is adult life. But that was in the evening. Izuki-kun, the man continued as he reached for a kitchen door that presumably contained snacks. That couldn't have made you this tired. The boy shook his head and sighed. No, Kaken decided to have a LAN party at my place tonight. So when I came home my house was a mess. Spend all morning cleaning it. He let his head fall onto the table. Shudo patted the poor green-haired man's back in what was hopefully a consoling gesture. You shouldn't have given him your spare key, he added. I know. But he said he needed a place to crash for a while. I didn't think he'd be using it a full housing. He mumbled against the table. Maybe you should let him pay rent? Tenya added, as he put a bag of chocolate biscuits on the table. Or he just needs to get laid. May had gracefully entered the room to grab a biscuit as soon as the package had been opened. Tenya had always sworn she had a device that notified her as soon as something sweet opened so she could come and eat it. Shudo started to think he was right. The fact that she randomly appeared didn't surprise anyone. What she said, however, effectively silenced the room. The boys stared at her with wide eyes. Izuki was blushing a little, Shudo was simply flabbergasted and Tenya face-palmed. May only popped the biscuit in her mouth and turned to their surprised faces. What? She shrugged. The guy is simply frustrated. Nothing a good bang can't beat. Tenya groaned and his eyebrow twitched a little in his face palm. Then May turned to Tenya to hug him from behind. Why do you think I'm so happy all the time? I have no complaints. She gave him a small kiss on his cheek with a grin. Tenya turned to her, his head bright red. May. That's too much information. They don't need to know that. He was waving his hands around in robot-like movements again. It had been a while since he did that. Shudo simply thought he grew out of it, but apparently it still returns when he gets flustered. Izuki suddenly sat upright. You might have a point. He looked lost in thought as he put his hand on his chin. I mean, he has been behaving weird lately, might be because he really is frustrated about not being able to get his attention. They have been staring at each other a lot. Half the time when they are fighting I expect them to kiss or something near the end. I wouldn't be that weird, everyone expects it, they are just too stubborn to dash. Shudo had turned to the green-haired boy again. Smiling a little at the fact that now both of his friends suddenly fell down into old habit. Tenya and his robot arms and Izuki and his muttering. It might sound a little mean, but it felt good to talk about someone else's life for a change. Something in it caught his attention though, and he interrupted the green-haired man. Wait, Bakugo-kun like someone else? I thought you guys were a thing by now. Shudo didn't care about his friends being bisexual. They were who they were, and he didn't love them any less for it. But he really thought Izuki liked his explosive friend. It made the boy turn bright red and he waved his arms around as well, though less robotic than the blue-haired boy. No, he's my childhood friend. I did have a crush on him at some time. But that blew over quickly. I knew it. Tenya slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone, including May, who had just reached out to grab another biscuit when she sat down next to Tenya and Shudo on the round table. Sorry. The man fell back in his seat. I just had a hunch that you confirmed. He rubbed his hand at the nape of his neck. He then stood up to grab the coffee pot, who had stopped running, and poured them all a cup. So, who's the unlucky lad? May took the cup that was supposed to be for Tenya, leaving the man to sigh and grab another one out of the cupboard. Izuki's grinned at this. Kirshimidro, he reached for the milk and poured some in his cup. He then offered to Shudo and rose his eyebrow. Shudo nodded and held out his cup to him while he poured some milk. Thank you. But before he took a sip he frowned. Wait, isn't he your boss? Izuki chuckled at this. Yes, though he did go to the same classes as us. He ranked up much quicker because he actually listened to his peers. Then he blushed a little and added silently, "Not like Kaken and me." He then smiled again. It was a tender smile. One that you make when you are happy for someone else. Kaken and Kirishima-kun already fell for each other in college. But our education kept us too busy for a love life. Shudo, Tenya and Mei nodded, urging him to continue, so he did. But now that they are older, Kaken is just too stubborn to ask him out, and Kirishima knows that if he asks first, Kaken is going to be too embarrassed to say yes. So he's just waiting for him to figure it out. The firefighter suddenly looked much older as he sighed. Shudo finally took a sip of his cup with an "I see." Mei cleared her throat, probably trying to lighten the mood again. She turned to Shudo with a smile. "So, how's your girlfriend doing? I've seen her, she looks totally hot." Shudo almost snorted his coffee back through his nose and swallowed it so quickly it left him coughing. "I'm sorry, what?" he choked out. "Your girlfriend? The black-haired one?" Mei grinned at his expense. Shudo stood up quickly, startling everyone. "Mei," breathed. "Did you read the article?" He knew he sounded panicked, but he needed to see it. The girl nodded with a grin. "Do you have it? Where did you read it? Can I see it? I need to see it." He probably sounded desperate right now, but he didn't care. He needed to see the article. He noticed Mei's grin turn into a frown. That wasn't good. Tenya's voice made Shudo calm down a little. "Shudo, what is she talking about?" He turned towards his friends. "There's an article out about the party I went to last weekend, where I met the girl again." Izuki leaned forward. "You know who she is?" He sounded excited. "Well, yes, but not because of the article." Shudo sat down again. He was getting a headache. "Wait, she's your girlfriend but you don't know who she is?" Even Mei seemed confused right now. "She's not my girlfriend." Shudo turned to her sadly. "The article made it up. That's why I need to see it, I want to know what else they say." Mei put a hand on his shoulder. "I read it at a friend's place, I only read the title so I can't say much, but I'll see if I can get my hands on it for you." She looked at him, immediately getting what gossip magazines can do with celebrities like him. She felt a little bad about believing it so quickly herself. But just a little. Shudo looked at her gratefully. Tenya cleared his throat and they all turned to him. "Shudo-kun, I think it's time you explain, so we can all follow what is going on." Shudo nodded in a sigh and folded his hands on the table. "I didn't get a chance to tell you this yet, but I figured out her nickname at the party, Dash." And then she left the room with puffed-up cheeks. Momo chuckled. Ochako rolled over the bed laughing. "OMG! This is better than a soap opera. What happened then?" Momo blushed a little and looked away longingly. "We waltzed until we both got dizzy." "Wait, you didn't stop? Even after she left?" Ochako was almost squealing. Momo shook her head. "You kidding me? Do you have any idea how good he smelled? God, I could have stayed in his arms forever." She was blushing a little more fiercely now as she grabbed another piece of the pizza that was on the floor in a pizza box. They had made themselves comfortable in her bedroom. Momo was sitting on the floor and Ochako had taken residence on the bed. They had ordered a pizza, so Momo finally got something to eat, because the moment she relaxed a little, she was starving. Ochako told her she should save some room for tonight's dinner, so she graciously offered to help finish it up. The girl also took another slice of the almost finished pizza. "I'm pretty sure it wasn't just his perfume." She wiggled her eyes and emphasized on the. Momo pushed her side playfully with a laugh. "I feel like such a teenager again." She sighed in relief. Ochako smiled at her. "You deserve this, Momo. You worked hard your whole life. You finally found someone." Momo smiled at her sadly. "Like you're one to talk." The girl simply smiled at her sadly too and shrugged as she finished her slice and rolled on her back. "You know, my job and studies are hard to get me someone to love. I'm married to my job. Unless I find someone who can live with that or is also like me, I'm not even going to try." She sighed and turned back to the girl. "Now, about this dilemma. What's happening tonight had you so shaken up?" Momo bit her lip. Just as she opened her mouth to explain, her laptop started blasting at full sound. It startled both girls, but as soon as Momo recognized the sound as a Skype song, she stood up, almost tripping over some clothes to reach the darn thing and press answer. Another rather angry voice blasted out of her speakers. Yamamo, what is going on and why is your cell phone dead? Momo gasped as Gyru's face appeared on screen, looking totally flustered and red in the face. She then reached for her phone only to notice the screen was indeed black. Oh, the battery must have died because I tried to call you so much. She face-palmed. Gyru did the same. You are unbelievable. First you scare me half to death by leaving 20 million messages, which do not even explain what is going on, I might add. And then you don't even bother to charge up your phone so when I do get back so I can actually reach you. Momo simply shrugged in a smile. I swear when I get back I will. I will. She was making a hand sign that looked unsurprisingly a lot like chalking someone. Mess up your room. She then yelled. Good luck with that, Kyuka-chan. I doubt you can do any worse than this. Ochako jumped off the bed nimbly to join them and gestured around herself. Oh hi Ochako. When did you get BA-? You replaced me. Gyru had started to talk to the brown-haired girl only to turn back to Momo looking outraged. Both girls started laughing at their friend's antics. No one is replacing you G-, the brown-haired girl giggled. Momo simply panicked. Check the chat. Gyru opened her mouth but closed it again without saying anything. She then took her mouse and clicked a few things. Momo and Ochako looked at each other with a smile and then shrugged. Gyru cleared her throat and turned back to the camera. First of all, welcome back girl. Ochako smiled and waved at her. Thank you. It's been a while. How was hiking? It was better than expected. It was actually a setup. His parents disappeared into a different hotel in the middle of the night. Momo didn't know if the girl looked happy or outraged. Wait, so you two were alone together? She leaned in closer to the screen. Ochako joined her, hanging on to her every word. Gyru blushed. He brought me to the top of the mountain in the middle of the night. Once we reached the top, there was a huge metal cage waiting for us, and inside was a blanket and a picnic basket. Momo pulled a face. Wait, he caged you? And he lured you with midnight snacks? Gyru chuckled. Yeah, I was skeptical at first too. But with the promise of a surprise, we both went inside and he closed it. Sue! What was the surprise? Ochako beamed at the screen. Gyru grinned. Lightning! Both girls frowned at each other and then turned back to the screen. Lightning, they said in union. A storm came up not much after we went inside. He knew this, obviously. Turns out the cage was a Faraday cage. Momo gasped, Isn't that dangerous? Ochako nodded at her question. Not if you don't know what you are doing. And Denki set it all up, for me. She blushed a little. Both girls remained quiet, waiting for her to continue. It was appealing, the purple head sighed. Lightning hit the cage at almost regular intervals and I couldn't stop watching. I think for once in my life, I didn't actually miss my phone. The way it hit in different tones, it was almost like a song. Momo whistled in a grin. That's quite a feat. I know. The girl sighed again. She seemed happy. You're leaving something out, girl? The brown head grinned at the camera. Momo had also noticed the story ended rather abruptly for Gyru's standards. The girl in question could only blush. He kind of asked me to live together after the storm calmed down. Momo and Ochako jumped up in a squeal. OMG! What did you say? I said yes. The girl pressed her eyes closed right after the confession to drown out the squeals coming from the other side of the screen. When? Both girls said in union. We don't know yet, but I did say I would like for it to be in Japan. I like it here, but my home is still with you guys. Denki agreed, saying he expected it. She smiled tenderly. Momo felt her heart warm up. You're going to make me cry. She lifted her finger to the corner of her eye suggestively. The girl almost did cry, but she blamed it on the emotion streak she was currently on. Seriously, there was a limit to how much a person can handle in one day. You guys are adorable. Ochako hugged her black-haired friend and Momo hugged her back. Gyru cleared her throat, also seemingly having a hard time keeping her emotions in check. Anyway, She tried to sound stern again. Finding my phone riddled with messages and missed calls wasn't exactly fun to come back to. Momo cringed back into the hug, hiding her head behind Ochako's arm. What in heaven's name could have happened in 30 hours? She was almost yelling again. Momo sighed and let go of Ochako. That's what I would like to know too. The brown-haired girl said as she let go of her friend and put her hands on her sides. I know his name. Momo quietly answered. What? Jaira really yelled this time. How is that possible? There wasn't a party, was there? Did you find a magazine? Was he in it? I thought you had a business meeting. How did that go, by the way? She lowered her tone a little with that last question. The meeting was the reason. She bit her lip. This confused the other girls a little as they ped their heads. His name is Shuto. Todoroki Shuto. The YT scream could be heard, even if you would have been standing outside of Momo Yaoyorozu's apartment. And then she liked my hand. Shuto blushed a little, quickly regretting that he added that little detail. His friends were knacks at extorting their prey for as much information as possible. But Mei was on an entirely other level. Phew. Tenya pulled a face. Izuki and Mei only gasped and then laughed. Why would she do that? The blue head asked. Because I didn't notice I was chalking her, I was a little busy trying to focus on the sounds outside. The half-half boy admitted. That explains, she probably thought it was the only way to grab your attention without making a sound. Izuki put his fingers to his chin in thought. She disinfected it though. Even though I don't know where she even got the bottle because her dress was. Shuto stopped himself with a blush and then cleared his throat when he noticed everyone grinning at him. She then gave me her napkin. He took it out of his back pocket and showed it to them. It's when I got her nickname. She knew mine because she heard Toga-san yell it. Mei read out loud as she picked up the little piece of fabric. Hey, this is some quality stuff. She rubbed it gently. Tenya also reached out to touch it. Do you know what the initials stand for? Shuto nodded. I do now, but I will get to that later. For now she let me call her Yamamo. That's a pretty name. Midoriya grinned at him. Shuto simply smiled and nodded. Wait, let me get this straight. Tenya gave the napkin to Izuki, who took it with wide eyes and nodded at Mei, signaling she was correct. Mei smiled proudly. You are now both on a first-name basis already? Shuto shrugged with a small blush. Yeah, I guess. This is way better than watching Days of Our Lives. Mei was grinning from ear to ear as she reached in to grab another biscuit. So you're now alone in the room, what happened next? Izuki returned the napkin to Shuto, who was now rubbing it absent-mindedly. We talked. He continued. She told me that her weird dress choices were because she was rebelling against her mother for also making her go on arranged marriage dates. Ah, so not to stuck you? Mei sang. Shuto turned a little red. What? She would never dash. Relax, I'm joking. She put a hand on his arm. You're so easy to tease. She chuckled. Tenya rose and eyebrow at her. Mei, leave the poor man to his story. I have a feeling things are about to get even more interesting. Shuto could see why this man turned out to be a police officer. His intuition was still top-notch. She also told me why she hated these parties, and that she was grateful for getting her out of there. Because she had a business meeting with someone soon, but she didn't know what he looked like, so she was scared to insult him and that he would probably be a, how did she say it? He interrupted himself, looking up in fake thinking. A rich stuffed snobby, but anyway. He chuckled at the thought. The others rose an eyebrow and looked at each other, but they said nothing to let him continue. I told her of my problem with Toga-san. He continued. And she offered a solution. He fell silent. What solution? Izuki urged him. The ending of one problem and the beginning of a bigger one. He sighed and looked at the handkerchief in his hands. She proposed we dance to make Toga jealous. He smiled sadly at the thought. It seemed like such a good idea at the time, but now he could only think back on it bitterly. Thank you, dumb magazine. Wait, Mei stood up. The picture? Shuto nodded. What picture? Tenya frowned. Izuki simply looked confused. The magazine picture I saw. It showed them hugging closely. Now that I think about it, the background was a dance floor. You were dancing? She hit her fist in her other hand, tying the two ends together. Shudo nodded again and closed his eyes with a sigh. Mei sat down again disappointed. That's such a letdown. You looked really close too. But you were only doing it to make Toga-san jealous. But you still danced. Izuki nudged his elbow with his own and grinned. Shudo felt a blush come up. Yeah, we did. She was really good at it. Shudo, I have to ask, you were close that time, right? Tenya looked at him seriously. Yes, it was a waltz, you kind of have to hug a little. Shudo answered him confused. Did the perfume help? Tenya asked him, his face serious. Shudo couldn't fight this next blush even if he tried, remembering the NTMT moment, which replayed a lot in his head, mostly before falling asleep. His fuzzy feelings slowly returned. He knew he had turned bright red by now but nodded nonetheless. She said I smelled good. Mei squealed and Izuki made a fist in the air yelling, yes. Tenya simply smiled and leaned back in his chair. I am relieved. Shudo chuckled a little at their reactions. He knew they had been worried about the whole perfume fiasco, especially when they knew Toga-san had entered the fray, but he felt happy they understood his dilemmas as well as they were their own. He drained his coffee cup and then sighed. Do we now get to the part where we find out her name? Izuki broke the peaceful silence as he refilled Shudo's coffee cup. Shudo nodded with a smile. Her name is Yaoyorozu Momo. All three of them gasped. Even I heard of that name, isn't that a designer brand? Mei put a hand in front of her mouth. Yeah, she's a designer. He said with a little hint of pride before he continued. You guys know that I had youngsters meeting this yesterday, right? It was the name he gave to the meeting he had yesterday, where new shops tried to make a name for themselves. The others nodded. Well, she was one of the candidates, and I'm the rich stuffed snobby butt. He grinned. This time he got 3 different reactions. Mei cackled so hard she almost fell from her chair. Tenya simply looked very surprised and Izuki groaned and face-palmed, probably feeling the shame for the girl in her stead. Wait, dash. Jer pinched the bridge of her nose and held out her hand in a stopping motion in front of her. You're telling me you actually ran into him again? She removed her hand from her face and slammed her desk, which made the video shake a little. Literally? I even messed up his papers. They were flying all around us. Momo twiddled her thumbs. Ochako sat crossed-legged on the bed, hanging on to her every word. This happens often, doesn't it? It's a thing for them by now. Jairu crossed her arms with a grin right after she fanned her hand towards the camera. Anyway, Momo interrupted them. When he helped me up and apologized, I helped him pick up his papers. It's when I found one with my data on it. That's when it clicked. She sighed. I feel stupid for not seeing it before. How did he react? Did he already knew? The brunette seemed genuinely interested. He told me he had just found out right before we smacked into each other, then he casually told me I was his 10 o'clock. She chuckled at the thought. Though it didn't seem funny at the time, she could actually laugh at it now. When both girls didn't say anything, she took it as a sign to continue. My realization made me step back, and I almost tripped over my suitcase. He helped me again, just like on the picture. She watched the other nod. Such a gentleman, isn't he? Ochako sighed happily. Oh, he is. Jairu rose an amused eyebrow. Momo simply cleared her throat. And as you all know my luck, that's when my mom and Mr. Todoroki entered the elevator. Hold on. Jairu rose her hand to interrupt her again. What was your mom doing there? Momo opened her mouth, but closed it again and looked thoughtful. You know, with all the commotion, I never got to ask. I will do that tonight. Okay, you do that. Now, your parents came in while he was helping you up? Continue. The brunette almost hopped up and down on the bed. It made Momo chuckle before turning serious again. Nothing really happened there, except for the fact that I got the impression Shudo and his father didn't get along. But it might be my imagination. She then continued without waiting for a reply. We escaped the elevator after a polite greeting. Mostly because I could feel my mother boring questions to me. So I grabbed his hand and pulled him towards the cafeteria. It's there that I realized my mistake. What mistake? Jiro asked and Ochako nodded. I had dropped the magazine. She sighed. Both girls gasped. Oh no. The brunette put her hands in front of her mouth. And the title is Jiro piecing the pieces together. About us. Momo gave them a sad smile. They think I'm Todoroki Shudo's girlfriend. And his father probably found the magazine, because I can't find it anywhere anymore. Oh Momo. Ochako put a hand on her shoulder supportingly. Guys, am I a pervert? Shudo put both his hands through his hair and rested them in it while leaning with his elbows on the table. He looked downright miserable. Izuki didn't know where the question came from. If one guy wasn't a pervert, it would be Todoroki Shudo. What do you mean? Tenya cut off the boy's musing and asked the question before he could. What I mean is, I've been thinking about her. But it feels wrong. He cryptically explained. Not that Deku understood any of it, he needed more information. We're going to need more than that, bro. The firefighter chuckled a little. I've seen her in some interesting outfits, to say the least. I mean, it's obvious that she doesn't shy away from showing skin. He swallowed and thought a little before continuing. But when I met her yesterday, all proper and businesslike, I actually checked her out. And I can't say I didn't like it. But I hated myself at the same time. He admitted. Deku watched as the man blushed a little. Izuki had never seen the man blush much before. But it seems like today he was making up for all of the years lost. It took everything he had to not burst out laughing at the realization that dawned on the green-haired boy. One of his best friends finally had a crush, and he didn't know what to do with it. Now, how do you explain that this is natural? Thankfully, Mei was there to help. Shudo, do you think she's pretty? She asked with a sly smile. The half-half boy looked up quite flustered. Of course she's pretty, he barely held himself from yelling that last statement. But she's so much more than that. He continued a little quieter. She's incredibly kind, smart as hell, shy too, considering how quickly she blushes. He almost chuckled himself at that last part too. Izuki felt his heart warm. Okay, probably more than just a crush. Punctual, she was at least an hour early. Strong, I remember her elbow punch. He pulled a pained face. This made the others look at each other with a grin. He continued his compliments as if he was counting the alphabet. Talented, funny dash. Well endowed, Mei casually cut him off with a big smile. Well endowed dash, Shuto repeated after her, until he realized what he was about to say and turned bright red. He stood up in shock and turned to the girl. Mei. She rose her hands in defense. Well, she is. The conversation finally sank in. Wait, she is? You never told us that. Shudo turned to him, still a little red in the face, but he sat down again much calmer. It was irrelevant to the situation. Irrelevant, but Izuki felt his smile turn into a grin. Yeah, right. At least now we know you're a melons guy. I'm not a what? Shudo frowned at him, clearly not getting what he was saying. Bless this innocent closed-off child. A melons guy. When you're looking for a girl, you subconsciously choose a feature you like. Shudo's eyes went wide and opened his mouth to say something. Probably object, so Midoriya cut him off. I'm a guy, I guess, being bi and all. He awkwardly put his hand on the nape of his neck. I guess I might be a little bit of both. Tenya joined in, rubbing his chin pensively. Shudo's head whipped towards the blue-haired boy so fast, Izuki was afraid he'd get a whiplash. But his expression was the most interesting. Utter shock and embarrassment. Mei, however, seemed to have great fun in the conversation as she shot Tenya a wink and blew him a kiss. Did his eyes deceive him, or was she actually blushing? Interesting. A soft thud made him look sideways again as he noticed Shudo had ungracefully plopped his head on the table face first. How can you guys be so casual about this? All three of them laughed and Shudo rose his head again. Mei might be rubbing off on us. He shrugged. Deku noticed a small smile forming on Shudo's lips. Alright, I guess I am a melons guy. Midoriya watched as his neck was still a shade of pink with a snigger. But, as I was saying, she's far more than just good looks. He cleared his throat. Okay, we get it. Maze held up her hands again and then crossed them on the table. Shudo, it's okay to think a girl is pretty. She softened her smile. It is. He seemed confused. I just don't want to objectify her, you know? He turned to the table lost in thought. This let out a chuckle from May. Why do you think we dress up? She continued. When no one replied, she just simply stated the obvious. We want to be noticed, you know. As long as you remain polite about it and don't start harassing us, we're totally fine with a polite compliment or two. Telling a girl she has a nice dress, or that her hair is nicely done, can only earn you some points. She winked at him. Just don't whistle, or openly stare at certain body parts. She waved her fingers sternly. Izuki was impressed. He didn't know much about women, but he was learning a lot. If only he could take some notes. But where do you draw the line between polite and rude? He asked her. He seemed distressed. I don't want to turn out like that purple-haired creep. May thought for a bit as she put her finger on her chin and tapped 3 times. Well, for example, I think it's logical for a man to be a bit more bold with the girl he likes. Every guy is a little perverted with the girl he likes. The same can be said for the girl. That's how physical attraction works. She will tolerate and even want you to notice her more if it's mutual. Shudo rose an eyebrow. Clearly still confused. Could you elaborate? May sighed. Oh boy. All right. She continued. For example, why would I wear a cleavage? Izuki felt a little unconformable, not really liking where this conversation was going, and shifted in his seat. He noticed Shudo did the same thing. For Tenya? Shudo tried. Bingo! She snapped her fingers. I want Tenya to notice me. I don't always dress up, but I want to look good when we go out, so I can feel well when Tenya gets a little jealous when other men stare. I like it when he gets protective. The policeman cleared his throat uncomfortably. Plus I like to tease him. She smiled at the blue-haired man, whom had already opened his mouth to protest. This, of course, could be different for any woman. The woman ignored her fiancé and simply continued. But the main goal is always to be noticed by someone who could be a potential mate. Oh, I get it. Izuki slapped one of his fists into his other hand. Like Shudo putting on the perfume, because he wanted to smell good so he could grab her attention. The poor boy turned bright red again. That was only for academic investigation. His voice rose an octave unintentionally and cleared his throat. Izuki chuckled at his poor excuse. He wondered if the man actually believed that himself. Shudo, I think you should figure out if she likes you as soon as possible. Tenya finally decided it was safe enough to join the conversation. That's good idea, dear. May joined him. Tell you what. If next time you two meet and she's wearing something eye-catching again, she's probably looking for your attention. I don't think it's that simple, May. Izuki sighed at her idea. How so? She frowned. She's a fashion designer. Izuki offered and then turned to Shudo. She's kind of obligated to wear nice things, right? Shudo nodded and seemed lost in thought as he stared in front of him. May's face fell. Ugh, why can't you fall for the easy types? She waved her hands in the air in frustration as she stood up to grab the pot of coffee. She refilled his cup before he had a chance to realize what she said. When he rose his head to object, however, Izuki quickly cut him off. Man, I'd like to meet this girl. To actually getting Mr. Straight Face here, think he's a pervert. She must be something. He nudged his friend's elbow. The man could only blush as he hid himself behind his coffee cup to take a sip. Oh, she's a total babe. May sat down again when she refilled all of the cups and grabbed the last biscuit. Wait, did she eat the whole pack? Izuki didn't even remember having even one. Tenya gave her a stern look as he watched her devour the last biscuit. Anyway, she complimented you on your outfit and then asked if you were friends. What happened then? The man was dying to hear the rest. Shudo nodded, surprised he actually wanted to hear the full story. Right? He cleared his throat. She asked if that as a friend, if I would grade her as if she was a stranger. He smiled at the memory. Izuki let out a whistle. She must be confident then? Not at all. I think she actually wanted to see if she could make it in, without any help, sort of like a test for herself. He frowned. But that's just a guess. Izuki smiled at the man, He knew this meant a lot to him even if he wouldn't admit it. Did she? May was the one who seemed interested. Let's just say her presentation left an impression on me. And my dad. He sighed wistfully. The others stared at each other and Izuki broke the silence. Your dad? OMG. He was wearing the suit? One of your suits. Jairu gasped as she leaned into the camera, almost like she wanted to crawl through it. Momo nodded and chuckled at her. But he didn't know? Ochako offered. She was also smiling. No. That's the best part. He was actually bragging about never having seen something like it before. It made me so happy, I almost jumped up and hugged him. She admitted with a blush. Jairu cackled loudly at that. Of course you would. You did make them with him in mind. And he was wearing them. She practically jumped and then fanned her face. This is too much. She fanned a hand near her face. So, did you tell him? Ochako had once again changed pose and was now dangling her feet off the bed excitedly. Not immediately. Momo knew she must be grinning right now, but she didn't care. I saved that for the meeting. Both girls gasped. You didn't. Jairu practically yelled. I did. Momo smiled excitedly. I even changed my PowerPoint, so his outfit was the last one on the slide. All three of the girls started giggling at this. How did he react? Ochako bounced. He almost didn't. Momo turned serious again. He was so different at the meeting, so stoic. I almost didn't go through with it because I didn't recognize him. She sighed at the memory. I heard about that. Ochako interrupted her. He's supposed to be the most serious guy you'll ever meet. No emotions whatsoever. She waved her finger sternly. She then smiled. Or at least that's what the magazines claim. She shrugged. Momo nodded. She kind of understood that now. That was also what she had read about him in any magazine or article about the Todorokis. That's why she didn't believe it was him at first. But then he stood up with and, took of his coat and checked the label inside. In front of the whole aula. She squealed. It was the best thing ever. I totally got a reaction out of him. It was so satisfying. She felt overjoyed once more at the feeling she had, remembering how she had to keep herself straight and not yell, yes, out loud. Both girls smiled at her happiness. So, did you get the shop placement? Ochako was the one who asked this time. I don't know yet. Momo bit her lip. I think that's what I'll find out tonight. What's tonight? Jiro rose an eyebrow. The reason I needed to talk to you guys. Momo was playing with her fingernails. Hold on there. Izuki interrupted him by holding out his hand. You wear her muse? Shudo instantly turned a little red. I don't know, but her mother claims I am. It would make sense. Why else would she say that you looked better in the outfit than expected? Tenya rubbed his chin pensively. How do you feel about this, Shudo? Izuki pet his head. Shudo looked down at his cup and played with the ear. I don't know. I feel flattered, I think. The outfits are really well made, and the design is amazing. But I don't know if it's really true, she never confirmed it. He sighed. Well, if it is true, we could have a problem. May interrupted the men. How so? Izuki urged her to continue. She bit her bottom lip. I can't say for sure. But if she's an artist, this could mean two things. Neither men answered her, they simply waited for her to continue. Thought Shudo felt his stomach drop a little. He expected more of a reaction out of them from this revelation. May held up a finger. The first thing could be in our favor. Shudo frowned with a smile. Our favor? When did this become a quest for all of them? Probably since the beginning. He withheld a chuckle and focused on the pink-haired girl. She could really like you and her feelings for you inspire her to create things. She smiled at him. Shudo felt the fuzzy feeling return. And the second? Tenya was the one who asked this. May held out two fingers at him. The second is that as an artist, your aesthetic or behavior triggered her artistic sense and made her want to create. But that means this is only a temporary thing. She looked at the boy sadly. Shudo felt his stomach drop. This shouldn't really surprise him. She never really gave him any signs of interest other than being friends. But the more he thought about it, the more confused he got. Wasn't that what he also wanted to be? Just friends? I mean, he liked her. And she's the first girl that actually made him look at a woman in a different way. She also didn't literally throw herself at him, much like the other girls at the parties because of his status. He also wasn't oblivious to the fact that society labeled him as a pretty boy, even though he had a scar quite obviously, but she didn't really seem upset by this, or interested for that matter. Noticing that everyone was staring at him and smiled at them. That's all right, you guys. I'm just happy if she's willing to my friend after all this. Izuki nodded. What are you going to do about the dinner date though? The two-toned boy sighed out loud. I'm not sure. I guess I'll just let it happen, though I'm pretty sure my father is planning something. Speaking of which, Tenya checked his watch. It's almost 5, shouldn't you be getting ready? Shudo stood up surprised. It's 5 already? He checked his own watch. I got to run. He drained his coffee cup while standing and then walked towards the door. The others followed him with their eyes. Thanks for the coffee. He turned to them once more. And for listening. He smiled a little. But it turned out to be a sad one. It helped. No problem, man. Midoriya waved at him. Good luck. Tenya smiled. And don't forget to actually enjoy it at least a little. Mei simply winked. And only undress her with your eyes. Shudo turned bright red at the comment and blinked once to try and grasp what she mean. Tenya gave his fiancé a slight nudge in her side with a stern face. Ignore that, Shudo. Now go before you are late. Oh, and try and get her number, it would make everything a whole lot easier to meet. Midoriya cut in quickly. The half-half man nodded and turned around, his face still frozen in a frown as he rounded the corner. They heard him grab his coat, and when the front door closed again, Izuki sighed out loud. He's screwed, isn't he? Royally. Tenya took a sip from his coffee. Mei simply chuckled as she stood up. If you'll excuse me, I have to go visit my hairdresser. Again? You just went this morning? Tenya rose an eyebrow. I did. But this time, I'm going to check her magazines. She winked as she also turned towards the hallway and disappeared in it. Your fiancé sometimes scares me, Tenya-kun. Izuki shivered. Tenya could only sigh and nod. What about this blue one? Ochako picked up an item from under Momo's bed and then held it up. It's a last year's model. Momo looked at it pensively before shaking her head. At least this time I can wear something decent. My new line is officially out. So the lingerie line is a no-go. Jaira looked lost in thought. Momo, is this a date of sorts? Both girls stopped their search and turned towards Momo's laptop. I'm not sure. I think it's more like a business dinner than anything else. I mean, our parents are there. Why? She placed herself in front of the screen again so Jairu could see her. Ochako joined them. Because. Jairu suddenly grinned. There are no rules about business dinners, right? Momo frowned. Not that I know of. Ochako suddenly jumped up. This startled the black-haired girl. I get what you mean. She's not limited to a Yaoyorozu original because it's not officially about an arranged marriage. The purple head pointed 2 fingers into her direction with a grin. Bingo! Momo bit her under lip with her upper teeth. I don't know. It's crossing a very thin line. I know she's planning something. Then what better way to disrupt that plan, by wearing something you didn't make? Jairu seemed way too excited about this. Ochako, grab the Chinese dress. Ochako nodded with wide eyes and then grinned as she turned around and practically ran into the walk-in closet. She sidestepped a few times so she wouldn't trip on any of the items on the floor. Wait, not the Chinese dress. Momo felt her eyes widen. That's way too tight. Oh, lighten up. You look amazing in it and you know it. The purple head fanned her hand towards the screen once. Momo couldn't argue with her there. Plus she really loved the dress. The reason she bought it in the first place. But she never dared to wear it. It wasn't revealing or anything, it was just very curvy. Ochako returned swiftly with a black dress and moved it in her arms. Try it. She was seriously way too excited about all of this. Momo sighed and took the outfit. She disappeared into the bathroom. Jiro gave the brunette a double thumbs up and the girl returned the gesture with a smile. You think she'll be okay tonight? Ochako leaned a little closer to the screen as she sat down in front of it. I hope so. Jairu sighed. I'm kind of betting on the Todoroki kid to help her out a little. She frowned as it felt weird to say his name. Ochako chuckled. You really trust this guy? A smile appeared on the purple-haired girl's face. Way more than I probably should. She frowned. But he has done nothing if not being exemplary. I just wish I was there right now. Ochako nodded understandingly and they fell into a comfortable silence. Wow. I know you look good in it, but this is a whole other level. Jairu suddenly spoke as she rose her eyebrows into her hairline. Ochako turned around swiftly and whistled. If he's not drooling after this, he's definitely gay. Suddenly Momo laughed out loud. You guys are exaggerating. She grinned as she placed herself in front of the mirror. Though she had to admit, she did feel rather good in this dress. But isn't it a bit much? Nonsense. Ochako stood up and grabbed the red rose pin she stole from the bathroom earlier, that and a comb. Momo never noticed when she had done that. Ochako placed herself in top of a chair and started combing her hair. Do you think he thinks I'm weird? Momo suddenly asked. What you mean? Ochako tried to say, but she was currently balancing a comb into her mouth and holding up her hair at the same time. So it came out a bit warped. Momo withheld a chuckle. I mean, now that he knows I made the outfits with him in mind, he probably thinks I'm creepy now. She sighed. Nonsense. Kyuka sternly stated, there was no room for doubt. I'd be honored if you made an entire clothing line in my honor. She put her hand on her chest and closed her eyes with a grin. Same really. The brown-haired girl was brushing Momo's hair again, so she could talk once more. Momo smiled at them. Thanks you guys. She was blushing a little as she pressed her 2-point fingers together. I did actually design 2 outfits in your image. Kyuka snapped her fingers. I knew it. The black one and pink one in high school, right? Momo saw her eyes go wide in the mirror and looked at the computer screen reflection of her friend. You knew. The girl simply shrugged with a smile. It was a little obvious. It was perfect, and also, the black and pink stretch suit you made fit Ochako here perfectly. That was for me. You totally made me model that. You're so sneaky. The brunette laughed. Momo simply smiled at them. She was happy with friends like these and wouldn't trade them for the world. They really did know her better than anyone. Now for the touch-up. Ochako twirled Momo's hair into an intricate updo and placed the single red rose in the middle of her raven black hair. Slid a few pins into it to hold everything in place and then turned her by the shoulders towards the screen so Jairu could look. She nodded approvingly. Though something is still not right. She tapped her chin pensively as Ochako grabbed a pair of red pumps laying around to place them in front of her. I get what you mean. She also turned towards the black-haired beauty. Momo rolled her eyes as she put on the pumps. Oh! The brunette exclaimed as she suddenly ran towards the bathroom. She dragged Momo with her. The girls simply let her. She had learned a long time ago that she couldn't possibly fight these two when they were playing dress-up. And she couldn't say she didn't enjoy the time they spent together. They made her feel alive and refreshed again, so she followed with a small smile. Jairu patiently waited, knowing the girl was in good hands. Ochako could do wonders with someone's hair. It's like she could defy gravity as soon as she touched it. It also helped off course that she knew what she was doing and what she was using. Jairu started checking her charging cell phone, because she knew it could take a while, and popped in her earplugs to listen to some music. After about 30 minutes she heard shuffling again. She looked up towards the screen and a satisfied smile appeared. Perfect.